The prize for passengers was supposed to be life-changing, seeing firsthand the most iconic shipwreck in history, the Titanic. Sadly, the outcome for all 5 people on board the OceanGate submersible, Titan, was life-ending. Somewhere along the journey, 3.8 kilometres down into the hostile depths of the North Atlantic Ocean, catastrophe struck. As you'll see tonight, there are lessons to be learned from this tragedy, and they're brutal. This wasn't an adventure. Like the Titanic, it was a disaster just waiting to happen.
People are so enthralled with Titanic that there are 3 words in the English language that are known throughout the planet, and that's Coca-Cola, God, and Titanic.
It's nothing short of a deadly irony. Wealthy, adventure-seeking explorers never returning from the gravesite of a ship once thought to be unsinkable. If the Titanic was the ultimate lesson in human hubris, the debacle of the submersible, known as Titan, is a tragic epilogue. 5 men sealed inside the sub, operated by OceanGate's maverick CEO, Stockton Rush, a man determined to test the limits of human ambition.
He definitely knew it was going to end like this. He quite literally and figuratively went out with the biggest bang in human history that you could go out with. And who was the last person to murder 2 billionaires at once and have them pay for the privilege?
Tonight, what drove Stockton Rush to disaster and why he refused to listen to those warning him of catastrophe.
They were diving in something which really was a ticking time bomb.
So you were not surprised?
No, I can't say that from a technical standpoint I was surprised. That's why we tried so hard to prevent it.
Nearly 4 kilometres under the ocean is arguably no place for humans. It's freezing cold, pitch black, and there's no oxygen. Rob McCallum knows better than most the allure of the deep. A world leader in extreme submersible operations, he's headed up multiple expeditions to the Titanic site. What do you think it is about the Titanic? Is it the romance? Is it the tragedy that humanity is endlessly obsessed with?
Yes, I think it's a turning point in maritime history. Here was a machine, one of the largest ever built, the fastest ever built, the sort of pride and joy of human engineering. And Mother Nature changed our attitude and in a single blow told us that we're not the masters of the universe. Nature is very much in control.
Hi, my name is Stockton Rush. I'm the CEO and founder of OceanGate. Let's take a look at Titan.
The Titan was an SUV-sized submersible. On the 18th of June, it began its 3rd descent to visit the Titanic wreck. But just 1 hour and 45 minutes later, the crew lost communications with its mothership and the world tuned in to their plight. On board was legendary Titanic expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet, billionaire explorer Hamish Harding, Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his teenage son Suleiman, and OceanGate's boss, Stockton Rush.
Taking a completely new approach to the sub design, and it's all run with this game controller and these touch screens. So if you want to go forward, you press forward. If you want to go back, you go back, turn left, turn right, go down, go up. And it's Bluetooth, so I can hand it to anybody. And it's meant for a 16-year-old to throw it around, and super durable. We keep a couple of spares on board just in case.
I think Stockton was designing a mousetrap for billionaires.
Wow.
Yeah.
From the shores of Honduras, tourist submarine operator Carl Stanley swings between grief and anger over a tragedy he describes as preventable and inevitable. Stockton Rush had been a friend. Back in 2019, Carl was one of the first to set foot inside the doomed Titan on a test dive in the Bahamas. What did you experience during that dive?
Well, I would say every 3 to 4 minutes there was loud gunshot-like noises. It's a heck of a sound to hear when you're that far under the ocean in a craft that has only been down that deep once before.
Carl was convinced those noises were the carbon fibre hull slowly cracking, and he immediately raised his concerns with Stockton Rush in a series of heated calls and emails, writing, "There is an area of the hull that is breaking down. It will only get worse." Carl also felt Rush had a disturbing lack of operating experience, and he told him so in no uncertain terms.
No, I literally painted a picture of his wrecked sub at the bottom, and even that wasn't enough.
You've been building deep sea submersibles since you were a teenager. You've got thousands of hours experience in piloting these craft. In your expert opinion, what was the fatal flaw of the Titan?
There's no doubt in my mind that it was the carbon fiber tube that was the mechanical part that failed.
And that's what you believe you heard essentially cracking?
Correct.
Titan was the only commercial submersible in the world with a hull made from carbon fibre composite.
Carbon fiber is coated with rhino liner, which is sort of what the military uses. It stops water penetration.
That's because the rest of the industry considers the lightweight material not up to the job, incapable of withstanding extreme deep sea pressure. But for Stockton Rush, the extra space meant he could fit more passengers on board.
You know, I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fiber and titanium, there's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did. It's picking the rules that you break that are the ones that will add value to others and add value to society. And
They were so proud of flaunting the accepted norms. And if you're going to flaunt an accepted norm, you really need to know what you're doing. And I wasn't convinced that that level of expertise was there.
Rob McCallum worked with OceanGate as a consultant early on, but was alarmed by the company's experimental approach.
Join the crew of the Titanic survey expedition.
And when Stockton Rush announced his plan to take passengers to dive the Titanic in an unclassed submersible, Rob quit. Stockton Rush once said, "If you're not breaking things, you're not innovative." I mean, is there truth to that in your industry, or is that just reckless?
Completely reckless. I mean, it's great fun breaking world records. I mean, I just love it. But they don't count if everybody doesn't make it home.
Rob wasn't alone in his concerns. By 2018, the submersible community had become so distressed by Stockton Rush's apparent disregard for safety standards that 36 industry experts wrote to OceanGate, warning catastrophe was looming unless changes were made.
This is a 5-man submersible.
That same year, the company's chief pilot, David Lockridge, was fired and sued for raising a long list of safety concerns.
If someone raised a safety concern, as the chief pilot did, they were not only not listened to, they were silenced. That is such a toxic culture when it comes to safety. And it's the reverse of everything else I know in the maritime industry.
The Titan operated in lawless international waters.
Copy that.
OceanGate called passengers mission specialists. And while some on board were indeed deep-sea experts, others were thrill-seeking tourists.
First time in a submarine, it looks really cool in here too.
Crucially, the sub wasn't independently certified or classed. Customers signed a company waiver before boarding the Titan. It mentions the possibility of death at least 8 times.
The game changes when you put paying passengers in there, because you can't do that unless there is consent. And people can't consent to something that they don't really understand.
And the ocean doesn't care if you're a millionaire.
No, I mean, the pressure at 4,000 metres is unrelenting and unforgiving. I mean, you know, you don't get wounded at 4,000 metres. You come home in one piece or you don't come home at all.
We will drift down, we will hit the bottom, we'll have communications.
You still pumping?
Yeah.
What are you at?
If Rob McCallum paints Stockton Rush as reckless in his ambition, blinded by his passion, Carl Stanley goes a step further, insisting Rush must have known it could only end like this. So you're saying he had a death wish?
The only question in my mind, the only question is when. He was risking his life and his customers' lives to go down in history. He's more famous now than anything else he would have ever done.
It's a stunning allegation from someone who knew Stockton Rush and his sub well. But OceanGate insists what many saw as reckless was necessary to further humanity's understanding of the final frontier.
I feel like as co-founder, I do have to stand up for the fact that I feel that what we were doing was right and was heading in the right direction.
Well, there must have been something wrong with it, because 5 people are dead.
Racing to find the missing dive vessel that is.
It was the macabre countdown the world couldn't turn away from.
At this point, it could be anywhere from about 54 to 80 hours of oxygen left.
As we waited and wondered about the fate of those on board the missing Titan submersible.
Repeated banging has been picked up on sonar equipment.
Headed for the magnificent, ghostly remains of the Titanic.
As an expert we spoke to says that window of opportunity is quickly closing.
After an exhaustive 5-day search,
I offer my deepest condolences.
The US Coast Guard declared what many industry insiders, like Rob McCallum, had already surmised. The sub had suffered a catastrophic implosion.
The whole volume of the submersible collapses in about 2 milliseconds. And it takes 25 milliseconds for the human brain to detect a threat. So it's not so much that you die, it's that you cease to exist. It's almost the perfect end.
Attention and scrutiny quickly turned to the Titan's pilot, OceanGate co-founder and CEO Stockton Rush, who for years brushed aside red flags raised by colleagues and passengers about the safety of Titan. Guillermo Sunline knew him better than most.
Very intelligent, very funny guy. I think most people don't realize what a comedian he actually was. But very capable engineer, very passionate about oceans and ocean exploration.
The friends and business partners co-founded OceanGate in 2009 with a shared vision.
The ocean is just so big and we know so little about it. And so for us, it was really about giving humanity access to these assets that could take everybody down into the ocean.
Guillermo left the company 10 years ago, but remains a shareholder and a loyal supporter. He now finds himself in the awkward position of defending the man responsible for the only submersible implosion in history. Was Stockton Rush a reckless villain, or was he an innovator, an explorer, a rule breaker with a vision?
I think the term reckless is not something I would ever associate with Stockton, or with OceanGate, at least while I was there. It's almost the exact opposite of that. He's been kind of portrayed as this risk-taker maverick who would just, disregard safety for the sake of innovation itself. But that is not the person that I knew. He was very risk-averse, and I've never, in the 3.5 years that he and I worked together, I never saw him take unnecessary risks.
Isn't taking paying passengers on an unclassed sub, about which there have been several safety warnings, down to the Titanic, an unnecessary risk?
I know 2 of the other 4 crew members that were lost would cringe if they were being labeled as tourists or passengers. They considered themselves explorers. They considered themselves part of the crew. They considered that their financial investment was going toward scientific research and exploration of the oceans.
But when you have people who had heard cracking noises in the Titan, people who are engineers saying these materials aren't appropriate, your testing isn't appropriate, surely that points to a huge safety risk.
Well, the popping noise is expected in carbon fiber hulls. That was in prior hulls, not in the one that dove a couple weeks ago. Things were fixed. So I think it's still premature to even address these kinds of questions.
Well, there must have been something wrong with it, because 5 people are dead.
Well, we don't know exactly what happened. It could have been a number of different things that caused the implosion.
And when we want to go down...
The way Guillermo sees it, others in the industry, through competitiveness or perhaps lack of foresight, had been trying to stifle OceanGate's innovative plans for years.
I do share the concerns about the risks that were taken, but I try taking a longer-term view of everything.
But do you concede that if he had have stopped and heeded some of the warnings, he may still be alive today?
Potentially. If he had done nothing, he and the crew members may still be alive, but then again, humanity may still be stuck not knowing anything about the world's oceans.
As the families of those killed grieve, last week, OceanGate suspended all exploration and commercial operations. While the watery graves of the Titanic and the Titan are now forever tragically entwined, it's likely deep-sea tourism will recover from this catastrophic setback. But Rob McCallum hopes the Titan's voyage will be the last of its kind.
It's a big ocean out there. There are over 1 million shipwrecks. I would like to think that exploring wrecks and exploring the deep ocean is something that's going to continue. But I think in terms of Titanic, we probably have all the material that's ever going to be needed. She's been the subject of many books, countless movies and documentaries. Maybe it's time to bid her adieu.
Every 3 to 4 minutes, there was loud gunshot-like noises. It's a heck of a sound to hear when you're that far under the ocean in a craft that has only been down that deep once before.
Back in 2019, Carl was one of the first to set foot inside the doomed Titan on a test dive in the Bahamas. You've been building deep-sea submersibles since you were a teenager. You've got thousands of hours' experience in piloting these craft. In your expert opinion, what was the fatal flaw of the Titan?
There's no doubt in my mind that it was the carbon fiber tube that was the mechanical part that failed.
And that's what you believe you heard essentially cracking?
Correct.
Titan was the only commercial submersible in the world with a hull made from carbon fibre composite. That's because the rest of the industry considers the lightweight material not up to the job, incapable of withstanding extreme deep-sea pressure. But for Stockton Rush, the extra space meant he could fit more passengers on board.
So we got the aft dome here. This is another 3 1/4 inch thick titanium dome bolted to another titanium piece glued to the carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is coated with rhino liner, which is sort of what the military uses. It stops water penetration at high pressure into the carbon fiber.
Comparing Titan to a professionally built classed vehicle is like comparing a home-built microlight with a Boeing airliner. I mean, yes, they both fly, but the differences in engineering standards are profound.
Rob McCallum worked with OceanGate as a consultant early on, but was alarmed by the company's experimental approach.
A carbon fibre sub that's essentially a home build with no independent oversight is not up for the task, as we can now see.
Can you explain that a little for those of us who aren't familiar with carbon composites? Why is it not appropriate for that environment? What happens over time and over dives?
I mean, carbon fibre is actually essentially a long piece of string, a long piece of fibre. And it's wound around and around a shape, in this case a cylinder, and in a medium of resin or glue. And once it sets, you've got all of these fibers that are held in place by the resin.
Check the surface out.
But unlike metal, which is predictable, you know, you can give an engineer any kind of metal and give them the gauge, you know, the thickness and the application it's going to be used in, and they'll be able to calculate for you exactly how it's going to act. Carbon fiber, you can't do that because it's a material that's a composite. The fiber can vary, the resin can vary, the way it's built on the day can vary, so it's much harder to predict. The second thing is that each of those fibers is made up of actually many, many microfibers, and if they start to crack or separate or are damaged in any way, then that can lead to sort of a cascading event over a series of dives where the hull gets weaker and weaker. The opposite is true with metal.
So the Titan could have several successful dives, which it did, but then fail.
Yes, and you're not able to predict that failure point. So if we were to build a submersible out of titanium or steel, we would know at what point it would fail, and then we can dial it back to its safe working depth. I was so surprised that there is life all the way from the surface to the bottom. That is definitely the case at the Titanic site. It's the case actually all the way down to about 8,000 meters. But you dive through the water, and if you have the lights on, you're seeing this vertical snowfall as you're flying down through the biological matter in the water. And then when you land on the bottom, you're happy that you're there and you're lining up for the big event. And then as Titanic comes into view in the lights, it's striking how large the vessel is, but also how beautiful it is. We simply don't make vessels with those lines anymore. She was a graceful, graceful ship.
What is that long commute like? What's it like to be descending and waiting?
It's, for most submersibles, I find it an incredibly relaxing experience. Once you leave the surface, there's no sense of movement. There's no sound inside the vehicle. You can't hear anything from outside. And so you're in this cocoon, this sort of peaceful cocoon, and all you can hear is the humming of air conditioners, pumps, laptops, that sort of thing, and each other. And so it's a very, very relaxing place. But, you know, once you're down at the bottom and you're waiting to see whatever it is you've come to see, in this case, Titanic, I mean, that's the excitement.
If there's one small comfort to be taken from the OceanGate deep-sea submersible disaster, it's that death was instant for the 5 occupants on board. But a year on from the tragedy, there are still so many unanswered questions, like why the strange-looking craft on a mission to the wreck of the Titanic catastrophically imploded, and why, for days on end, was the world led to believe there was hope for a successful rescue mission. The lack of credible information about what really happened is now becoming increasingly unfathomable, not only for other undersea explorers like Hollywood icon James Cameron, but also for the families of the victims.
It's in my home, but it's in a box because I don't want to see it every day because it's make me remember this bad moment.
It might not look like much, but this shriveled styrofoam cup holds more meaning than most of us can fathom. For Sidonie Nargeolet, it's a treasured trophy, the only remaining evidence of her father's final adventure to the wreck of the Titanic. It must be so special for you to have that cup.
Yeah, it's very special because it was with my dad to his last moment. So, yeah, it's very special.
An avid deep-sea explorer, Paul-Henri Nargeolet made a habit of taking decorated styrofoam cups on his missions to see them shrink under the pressure of descent. Remarkably, this one somehow survived the catastrophic implosion of the Titan, OceanGate's experimental submersible.
The all-out search for a missing submersible with 5 people on board leads to a tragic discovery, and there are no survivors.
1 year on, Sydney is still desperate for answers, but she's never heard from OceanGate.
They still haven't contacted you to give condolences or explain what happened?
Nothing from them. No condolences, no we are sorry, nothing.
That's extraordinary.
These guys broke the rules. It's that simple. They should not have been legally allowed to carry passengers.
James Cameron is furious too. His friend, Sydney's dad, Paul Henry, should be alive today.
I got him and he got me.
Tonight, the legendary film director and Titanic expert is ready to set the record straight on the frenzied search mission.
Running all over the surface, the entire world, waiting with bated breath, talking about 96 hours of oxygen. We all knew they were dead.
And why, despite 5 active investigations, the world is still waiting for answers.
I think they went by a procedure that was torturous for the family.
Seeing her coming out of the darkness like a ghost ship still gets me every time.
James Cameron's knowledge of the deep goes far beyond his Oscar-winning picture.
Are you ready to go back to Titanic?
He's visited the Titanic wreck site 33 times and designed and piloted a submarine to the deepest known point on Earth.
I'm at the trench wall. I am working a steep rock cliff, over.
You've spent more time at the Titanic wreck than the actual captain spent on the ship.
Yeah, if you do the math, it actually is true.
Given his credentials, you'd think he'd be an obvious choice for investigators looking for expert advice on the Titan's ill-fated dive. And yet, Jim is still waiting for a phone call.
What are you hearing about where the investigation is up to?
I've made myself available. I've volunteered to the investigative committee at the Coast Guard. Nothing.
They haven't interviewed you?
I think they want to do things their way. And frankly, I think they've kind of got egg on their face, and they don't want outside opinions. That's just my interpretation.
It's a stunning claim from one of the world's leading experts in deep-sea exploration.
That was, almost a year ago, so...
That's astonishing to me.
Yeah, why listen to a scientist?
We've taken a completely new approach to the sub design, and it's all run with this game controller and these touch screens. So if you want to go forward, you press forward. If you want to go back, you go back. Turn left, turn right, go down, go up.
OceanGate's maverick CEO, Stockton Rush, pushed the limits of sense and safety while promising passengers an unforgettable adventure.
OceanGate Expeditions offers you the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be a specially trained crew member safely diving to the Titanic wreckage site.
The corporate video might sound enticing, but in reality, the Titan was an untested outlier. The only commercial submersible in the world with a hull made from carbon fibre composite, which industry experts agree is incapable of withstanding extreme deep-sea pressure. As a result, the sub wasn't classed or certified.
You're remembered for the rules you break. And, I've broken some rules to make this. Carbon fiber and titanium, there's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did.
He seemed to take a real pride in his unconventional approach, in breaking the rules.
Exactly, and I think this is a place where you've got to really know your stuff before you can step outside the box. You don't move fast and break things, as they say in Silicon Valley, if the thing you're going to break has got you inside it, along with other innocent people who believe your line of BS.
On June 18 last year, Stockton Rush set off for the most famous shipwreck on Earth, with Paul-Henri Nargeolet as guide, and 3 paying passengers: billionaire explorer Hamish Harding, Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood, and his teenage son Suleiman. But less than 2 hours into the dive on that Sunday, communication stopped and a media storm began.
Rescuers are racing to find the missing dive vessel.
But the U.S. Coast Guard is not letting up.
Well, we received a call in Boston the afternoon of the 18th. They had put a submersible down on the side of the Titanic, and they had lost communications earlier that day.
Captain Jamie Frederick knew right away the US Coast Guard was facing an unprecedented challenge. And had you ever received a call of that nature before?
No, it was certainly anomalous. In fact, I've been in the Coast Guard for just about 30 years, and I've never dealt with a subsurface search. It was challenging.
For the families of those on board, it was an unbearable weight, with only one thing keeping them going: hope.
With all the boats that came, all the people involved for looking for them, I really had hope. I really thought they could find them.
And find them alive?
Yes, of course, I was thinking they would find them alive.
And for a couple of days there, a miracle seemed possible. Eerie echoes of banging noises picked up by sonar equipment lit a fuse under the search for the sub, painting a haunting picture of the 5 men trapped inside at the bottom of the ocean.
It just made such a beautiful media circus, you know, to talk about a race against time, these poor people, tapping sounds. Tapping sounds are ridiculous.
James Cameron wasn't surprised at all when US Navy analysis found the banging noises weren't human and were most likely from the ocean or ships in the area.
They're hearing a little crescent wrench or something tapping against a hull over the sound of 11 ships operating in the immediate vicinity, moving giant pieces of deck equipment around.
Not possible.
You know, that's like, you know, hearing a sparrow fart over the cacophony of an airport.
So that whole thing was
maybe a
fiction.
metaphor you'll want to cut out.
That's a great metaphor, but you're saying that whole thing was fiction.
Well, we knew, I mean, my jaw literally dropped open farther and farther each day that they never cautioned everybody.
Coming up, the incredible rescue plans.
Once we connected to them, they were coming up.
And why the entire frenzy was pointless. Because, as you'll see, there was one critical piece of information the Coast Guard didn't share.
9:25, confirmed implosion. And I literally wrote that on the pad the moment I heard from my naval source.
So the Coast Guard lied.
The saga of the missing Titan submersible had all the makings of a Hollywood movie. Billionaire explorers missing on their way to the graveyard of a ship once thought to be unsinkable, with the clock ticking, oxygen running out, and the world watching.
I knew that this was going to be a big story.
Ed Cassano was ready to play the hero. His remotely operated deep-sea vehicle, the Odysseus 6, was the only submersible that would make it nearly 4 kilometres down to the Titanic site, and quickly.
Did you at that point truly believe this was a rescue mission?
Absolutely.
4 days after the sub disappeared and spurred on by reports of banging noises, Odysseus 6 descended through the cold, cruel depths of the North Atlantic Ocean with an incredible mission to tow the men to safety.
The plan that we had once we plugged into the scene was we would go to seafloor, we were rigged for heavy lift, we were going to connect onto the Titan submersible. Once we connected to them, they were coming up.
It would have been a miraculous survival story, but James Cameron says it was always fiction. Tonight revealing for the first time the moment he knew the Titan had suffered a catastrophic implosion.
I just found this in my file. It says, this is on Casa del Mar Stationery. That's the hotel I was in LA at the time that I heard about it. 9:25, that's AM, 9:25, confirmed implosion. And I literally wrote that on the pad the moment I heard from my naval source, very reliable source, that they had heard an event and triangulated it to the site.
That US naval intelligence of an implosion near the Titanic wreck site came just hours after the Titan set off. For James Cameron, it was a deeply personal tragedy. His good friend and fellow Titanic buff, P.H. Nargiolais, was on board.
I had a silent moment because I knew PH very well. And PH is how we'd say it because he's French, right? It was a somber moment. And then it just transformed into this crazy thing. Everybody running around with their hair on fire when we knew right where the sub was. But nobody could admit that they didn't have the means to go down and look. So they were running all over the surface, and the entire world, you know, waiting with bated breath, talking about 96 hours of oxygen. We all knew they were dead. We'd already hoisted a glass, you know, a toast to our fallen comrades on Monday night.
So the Coast Guard lied?
I don't think they lied. I think they went by a procedure that was torturous for the family.
Unnecessarily?
Unnecessarily torturous for the family. I don't think they lied. They just didn't disclose. They were informed by naval intelligence that an implosion event was tracked to the coordinate of the Titanic wreck site. Now, could it have been something else? 1 in a trillion.
But the Coast Guard insists that information was inconclusive. As far as Captain Jamie Frederick is concerned, a rescue mission doesn't become a recovery mission until there's tangible evidence. Had you had at that early stage reports of naval intelligence of an implosion at the Titanic wreck site that day? Had you heard those reports?
We received the information from the Navy very early on that they had detected an anomaly in the vicinity of the site of the Titanic, but at the time, that information was at a classified level that couldn't be shared publicly, and it also was not definitive. And frankly, you know, in the business of search and rescue, absent definitive information, we have a moral responsibility and a statutory responsibility, frankly, to continue to search.
So did you genuinely feel hope that this was still potentially a rescue operation?
If there's one thing that I've learned in 30 years of doing search and rescue, if you don't have hope and you're conducting a search and rescue case, you're in the wrong business, because I have seen some pretty remarkable things happen over my career.
But this time, it wasn't to be. Ed Cassano will never forget the moment his remotely operated vehicle, the Odysseus 6, spotted debris on the sea floor.
It was quiet, I remember, and you know, it felt like immediately there was an answer of what we were addressing. I would say in general the feeling was professional, but profound. It was obvious that what we were dealing with was a recovery, not a rescue.
Sidonie Nargiolais had been desperately clinging to hope that her father, PH, could be found alive.
When you learned there had been a huge implosion, how did that make you reflect on the search? That in fact, you know, they likely had been dead for days.
I don't really know what to think about it because, in a way, this church... Sorry.
No, take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, in a way, I had hope for days more, you know, about him being alive. So, in a way, it's more difficult because it's hope for nothing, but in a way, I thought during 4 days, he was still alive.
It's a sad irony for Sidonie that her father's obsession with the Titanic's watery graveyard would ultimately claim his life.
My dad could spend all day long talking about the Titanic, so he really loved that.
He was Mr. Titanic to many people.
Yes, Mr. Titanic.
PH's 38th dive to the wreckage, alongside OceanGate boss Stockton Rush, would be his last.
It never made sense to me how someone with so much experience would agree to dive with OceanGate knowing the risks.
That's a tricky area for me.
Yeah.
But I have to remind myself that PH wasn't an engineer, per se. He was an explorer at heart. I also know his heart, which was to go, which was to dive.
Do you expect there'll be charges? Should someone be prosecuted?
I think that there should be some changes. They didn't have classification. Theoretically, they should not have been legally allowed to carry passengers.
This is an experimental sub. This is a dangerous environment.
Is this a case of the person who should be prosecuted is, in fact, already dead?
Yeah, I think the tragedy is he took others with him. He should have listened to the warnings. But don't we say that about the captain of Titanic?
James Cameron is now channeling his outrage at OceanGate and the investigation into a new deep-sea mission, vowing to return to the Titanic in honour of his dear friend, and to make sure Stockton Rush's failed experiment is relegated to the history books.
Exploration will proceed because it must, and because it's part of the human spirit, right? And, you know, a knucklehead that made a mistake shouldn't be holding everybody else back, and it won't, right? We have plans to build a sub that can go to 4,000 meters, and we will.
Wow.
And I may even go back to Titanic in that sub, just to prove the point that if it's done right, it can be done safely.
One year on, how do you reflect on the Titan tragedy?
Well, I don't think about it a lot because it was pretty cut and dried in its moment of history that we all globally shared. You know, it's certainly a tragedy for the people aboard and especially for the families. But, you know, I think it's important for people to understand, put it in a historical perspective, if we can. We've had 50 or 60 years of flawless operation of deep submersibles, and I'm in that world. I know that world. I've built my own subs. I've operated my own subs. I worked with the Russian subs, which are some of the best in the world in their day. You know, I've done the engineering projects. I've designed and built vehicles to go much, much deeper than Titanic. And I think I understand the safety protocols and the safety mentality very, very well. And these guys broke the rules. It's that simple. And so this is an anomaly, right? And it should be thought of as an anomaly, not the standard. I think, you know, I've done all these films from the deep ocean, and it sort of suits the film to make it seem exotic and dangerous and, you know, going to another planet and that sort of thing. The truth is, it's really done by a set of standards that are so rigorous, it's very, very safe.
It's my understanding, and I think you've just confirmed this, that in the submersible community, that culture of safety it's critical. I mean, not only to innovation, but to commercial success.
Sure, exactly. So nobody's making a great deal of money in the deep submergence community. The institutional places like Woods Hole that operates the Alvin, they're, you know, everybody's always struggling for financing to do more science. The commercial companies, you know, like Triton, for example, that I'm involved in, you know, nobody's making a fortune at this. We do it because we love it. And where we spend our money on these vessels, these subs, is in safety, certification, classification, doing everything by a set of rules that keep us all safe in the deep submergence community.
So why would OceanGate misrepresent the safety of Titan?
I think when you reverse engineer what happened, you have a particular individual, Stockton Rush. He was enamored of the sort of the glamour and the exoticism, and he was attracted to it. But he came from the wrong industry. He came from from aeronautics, and aeronautical engineering is fundamentally different. You're going for lightness and strength, but you're not necessarily going for compressive strength. Your enemy, you know, is all sorts of mechanical loadings, but it's not that squeezing, horrific pressure that you get at great depth in the ocean. And he chose the wrong materials and the wrong approach.
Had you met Stockton Rush? Did you know
Yeah,
him?
I knew him from the Explorers Club, and just, it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody.
What were your impressions of him?
You know, he was a nice enough guy. I didn't know him very well. He was always trying to get me to sort of jump in, because I'm obviously well known in the Titanic community. And, you know, I didn't want to have any part of a sub that had those design parameters. I mean, I knew it was a flawed design. And there's a bit of history to that I don't think anybody's talking about. There was another sub designed by a very credible designer that was a wound carbon fiber hull, cylindrical hull, with titanium end caps. And it was designed to go to the Challenger Deep. And all of us objected. We all told the particular individuals involved in that project, completely separate from Stockton's, that this thing was going to be a coffin.
Because of the carbon fiber hull.
Exactly, because of the carbon fiber. And there's another issue, which is mating dissimilar materials together at a high pressure mating surface. When you put titanium up against carbon fiber, they have a differential bulk modulus. I don't want to get too technical here, but it means they contract and expand at different rates, which causes slippage and stress and strain at that interface.
Which under that pressure.
Talking about a lot of pressure, and you're talking about certain rules you can't break. And those rules were broken. Several of those rules were broken. The most obvious one was the wound carbon fiber is the wrong material for that application.
He seemed to take a real pride in his unconventional approach, in breaking the rules.
Exactly, and I think this is a place where you've got to really know your stuff before you can step outside the box. And he came from a different community. While it's worthy and fun to be rebellious and to do things in new ways, in innovative ways, you don't move fast and break things, as they say in Silicon Valley, if the thing you're going to break has got you inside it, along with other innocent people who believe your line of BS.
Had you seen David Lockridge's letter in 2018 of warning?
There were a number of warnings from within the community. We all knew what they were doing. They pulled it off a few times. They got to Titanic and back, but the insidious nature of this, very much like the Titanic disaster itself, if you think about it, they had sailed full speed through ice fields many, many times, and they always knew to slow down and stop when they saw the ice. The Titanic guys didn't know that the very first iceberg they saw was going to be right smack bang in front of them. Well, they had dived a number of times, but the insidious factor is that wound carbon fiber, or any kind of composite material, has what they call cyclic loading. It will fail after multiple cycles because it's what's called an anisotropic material, meaning it's not a contiguous molecular structure like steel or titanium or even glass. Glass is a remarkable material for compressive strength. We think of glass as fragile, but under pressure it's great.
Right.
So you got titanium, you got steel, you got ceramics, you got glass. These are all things that are used for pressure vessels. Carbon fiber not being one of them, or any kind of composite material not being a good choice.
What are you hearing about where the investigation is up to?
I've made myself available. I've volunteered to the investigative committee at the Coast Guard. Nothing.
They haven't interviewed you?
They don't. I think they want to do things their way. And frankly, I think they've kind of got egg on their face, and they don't want outside opinions. That's just my interpretation.
Well, you're hardly an outsider. I mean, someone of your stature in the industry, it's a surprise.
Well, I would challenge anybody to say they know more about the actual wreck site than me, now that P.H. Nargelet passed as a result of this tragedy. He arguably had more time on station at the wreck site than I have, but short of him, so they should be inviting me, but they're not. But I've also been kind of vocal about the Coast Guard propagating this kind of 4-day travesty of searching, a search box the size of Connecticut, everybody running around with their hair on fire when we knew right where the sub was. There's a principle that's called last known position. That's the first place you look. So the last known position of the sub was, an Earth coordinate at 3,500 meters down. We expected the wreckage to be sitting exactly under that coordinate on the bottom. That's exactly where they found it. But nobody could admit that they didn't have the means to go down and look. So they were running all over the surface, and the entire world, you know, waiting with bated breath, talking about 96 hours of oxygen. We all knew they were dead. We'd already hoisted a glass, you know, toast to our fallen comrades on Monday night.
So the Coast Guard lied?
I don't think they lied. I think they went by a procedure that was torturous for the family.
Unnecessarily?
Unnecessarily torturous for the family. I don't think they lied. They just didn't disclose. They were informed by naval intelligence that an implosion event was tracked to the coordinate of the Titanic wreck site. Now, could it have been something else? 1 in a trillion.
Unlikely.
So they should have managed the family's expectations, but it just made such a beautiful media circus, you know, to talk about a race against time, these poor people, tapping sounds. Tapping sounds are ridiculous, you know, they're dropping sonobuoys in the water. The Canadian Air Force or Coast Guard were dropping in sonobuoys that immediately drift away in the 3-knot current of the Gulf Stream and are gone within an hour. And somehow at that slant range of many miles, they're hearing a little crescent wrench or something tapping against a hull over the sound of 11 ships operating in the immediate vicinity, moving giant pieces of deck equipment around.
Not possible.
You know, that's like, you know, hearing a sparrow fart over the cacophony of an airport.
So that whole thing was
maybe a
fiction.
Metaphor you'll want to cut out. You know,
I love that metaphor. That's a great metaphor. But you're saying that whole thing was fiction.
Well, we knew, I mean, my jaw literally dropped open farther and farther each day that they never cautioned everybody that all indications were that they were lost due to an implosive failure. But that there's always a remote shred of hope that that's not the case, but that's the indication. You know, that's what they should have said.
Did they lie by omission?
I'm not comfortable with the term lying.
Yeah.
I think they were following a set of procedures. But the thing is, in a funny way, it reflects back to my first comment, which is subs are safe. They are so safe that the Coast Guard has never been called. They didn't know what to do. We've never gone out on this before. You know, what do? We don't have an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle. We can't go down and look. What we can do is we can fly around and we can race around on the surface looking for debris. Well, you're not going to get debris from an implosion 12,500 feet under the surface, you know, 3,800 meters.
You knew what had happened, and in fact, you've got the note you made on the day.
I just found this in my file. It says, this is on Casa del Mar Stationery. That's the hotel I was in LA at the time that I heard about it. 9:25, that's AM, 9:25, confirmed implosion. And I literally wrote that on the pad the moment I heard from my naval source, very reliable source, that they had heard an event and triangulated it to the site. I already knew the answer even before I got this, because you can't lose comms and tracking at the same time by any other means than a catastrophic event, because they're two separate systems. The comm system is one transducer that, you know, you push to talk, or they were texting, I think, and the other one is a separate transducer that's independently powered, battery powered, internal, that sends out a passive signal and allows them to track the sub from the surface. You can't lose them both at the same time any other way but a catastrophic failure.
So when investigators say they want to find out exactly what happened, there's actually no doubt about what could have happened.
Look, I mean, there's always doubt, and they should eliminate less likely possibilities, like a failure of the front port. It had an acrylic front port, very, very similar to the ones that I've designed over time, working with the top expert in that, a guy named Jerry Staciu, who's not with us anymore. But when we were designing camera systems, when we were designing our sub to go to the Challenger Deep, we designed acrylic front ports. We know a lot about it. We know how they work, and we know how they fail. It's very, very, very unlikely that that was the failure. There was a bit of dialogue around this when they hauled the front hemisphere up out of the water, the nose cone, right? And they had put a sling through the hole that port goes in. But that port got blown out when the sub imploded. When water rushed in at literally multiples of supersonic speed, it blew the port out the front. That's why it wasn't there. It wasn't that it failed and came inward. If you know how these things work, you'd know that instinctively, right? So I would say it's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance that it was not a failure of the cylindrical composite fiber hull. That said, the exact nature of that failure needs to be understood.
And would they have known that something had gone very wrong, or would it have been?
Well, this is a question of some debate, because there was a transcript that is now thought to be a hoax that had them dropping their weights and attempting to surface. And if that was the case, then they did know. I think that transcript has been debunked. It might have been instantaneous out of nowhere. There might have been some cracking sounds preceding it, because they had a built-in acoustic monitoring system that was meant to tell them if there was undue microscopic failure of the hull. Well, first of all, in my book, if you've installed such a system, you're already dancing with the devil in the pale moonlight. You're not following what I would consider to be any kind of safe procedure.
Because it should never happen.
Well, you should never hear cracking of your hull. And if you are, you're doing something wrong in your design process. So even baselining an alarm system based on that is already beyond the pale of anything I would say real sub-designers would ever, entertain.
I've interviewed people who had been diving with Stockton Rush in previous years, and they all describe hearing cracking. Does it still shock you that he had these prior kind of incidents and warnings, and yet he continued down this path?
I think people don't really often believe in their own mortality. It's not going to happen to me. He had created a narrative in his mind. It made sense to him. I'm like those other rebels. I'm like those other innovators. I know my carbon fiber from the aerospace community. It was just a bad path on a wrong approach. And we all knew, you just don't make hulls out of that for external pressure. They're great for building airplanes. Composites are fantastic. They've revolutionized the transportation world. They're great for boats, for marine applications, stuff at the surface. They're no good in compression because of this cyclic fatigue that leads to failure not on the first dive, but on the 5th dive or the 10th dive. It becomes a minefield that gets progressively more and more mines out ahead of you as you travel across it. He should have listened to the warnings. But don't we say that about Titanic? Don't we say that about the captain of Titanic?
Yeah.
Played by Bernard Hill, the actor in my movie who just died yesterday,
very sad
unfortunately.
news. Yeah.
But such an iconic, first of all, such an iconic actor, but such an iconic character. In a sense, the symbol of the person who has so much hubris, they don't listen to the warnings. And also because it's worked before. We've done this before. We've taken our giant steamships through the ice field before. This is how we do it. And I think once they got that first dive under their belt, and they were probably scared to death, once they had that, they thought they were okay. That would have been true if it was a steel hull or a titanium hull. But it's exactly the opposite with a composite material, because it's dissimilar materials bonded together.
Have you seen images, vision or photos of the wreck?
I've seen a few stills that are frame grabs from ROV video.
Yeah.
It's exactly what we expected. In fact, we, in our small group, we had said, well, this is what they're going to find. And then when we saw the pictures, yep, that's exactly what they found.
And what does it look like?
Well, it's just a mass of shattered carbon fiber that doesn't even remotely resemble what it started life as. Because when something like that disintegrates, it kind of almost just, it's an implosion. It just shatters. So the titanium end caps are still in reasonably good shape because titanium is a strong, again, isotropic material.
But the rest of it is...
Carbon fiber hull is just shards.
Yeah.
Like you dropped a glass vase, except packed it all into the center, right?
So if I didn't know what I was looking at, you
wouldn't recognize the sub.
Wow. We cover a lot of, plane crashes and terror attacks, and those sorts of investigations are quite common. But I think for most people, it's difficult to know what this investigation actually looks like because it's such a unique environment, right? What are they looking for? Is most of it done actually on the surface, or how does it actually work?
Well, look, it's very expensive and difficult to get down there. In fact, they haven't even recovered all the debris from the sub. It's still down there. some of it, I'd say probably, I'm guessing now, but probably about a third of it. They pulled up the major pieces, but all the small bits are still lying there for anybody to come along and photograph at any point, which is not how you do an air crash scene, but it's all because of the remoteness of it. You know, I think if you had an air crash up in the upper Andes, they don't pull every piece out either, so it's a bit like that. I think they've done some best efforts to try to recover human remains, but again, you're talking about very, very tiny bits of material at this point. You know, they'll do their best, but you know.
Is it possible that it won't all be recovered?
It'll never be recovered. I'd say whatever is to be recovered has been done.
Wow.
You know, so but the investigation I think is going to look at the history. There was a lawsuit. One of the senior engineers actually spoke up against some of the problems with the carbon fiber. He was sued by the company to try to silence him. That'll all come out. There are lots and lots of photographs documenting flaws. I've seen some of them. I don't profess to be an expert on the investigation. I'm not on the inside of it. I just want to say that up front. Although I did put my hand up and say would be happy to testify, you know, as an expert witness.
And they weren't interested in your insights or experiences?
Not so far. You know, that was, you know, almost a year ago, so...
That's astonishing to me.
You know, why listen to a scientist?
Do
Nobody else does in our society.
Do you have faith in the investigation?
Look, I think it's impossible to investigate this without shedding some light on what happened. I also think it doesn't matter how long or short the investigation is, the answer is going to be the same. It was bad engineering. Bad engineering coupled with a lot of bad operational protocols. But I think those bad operational protocols only reflect on the mind state of the people doing it. They don't really lead directly to the failure.
Do you expect there'll be charges? Should someone be prosecuted?
I'm not sure. I don't know how criminal law applies to this. I think that there should be some changes. First of all, it should have fallen under the standard American Bureau of Shipping rules, which is you don't take paying passengers without having a classification, without having a certification. They were not certified. So your certifying agencies or your classing agencies are DVN, you know, the Norwegian, you've got German Lloyd's, you've got American Bureau of Shipping. They didn't have classification. Theoretically, they should not have been legally allowed to carry passengers. And they had a whole workaround for that where they called them payload specialists or mission specialists, which was really just sort of spackling over it with a lie.
Because you're a deep sea challenger, wasn't certified?
But it was designed by two people, myself and my fellow designer, Ronnie Allam, an Australian genius engineer, and we were never going to take passengers. It was an experimental craft. We knew it was experimental, and we also knew that like Stockton Rush's vehicle, it was so outside the box that the classifying agencies wouldn't really know how to handle it, and we always intended to do a second vehicle based on those principles and then have it classified if we were going to expand to a two-seater. But as a single-seater, it's an experimental craft. He and I were the only two pilots, so it wasn't necessary. No paying passengers, right?
You're not taking other people's lives into your own hands.
Taking my life in my hands. And I also knew, I mean, if you think about our vehicle, it was very unconventional in a lot of ways. The vertical form factor, a lot of things were very unconventional in the engineering. None of them were unconventional when it came to the pressure boundary. We all used we used very tried and true methodologies for how we made it safe for us. And then after that, how we got there, how we drove around, how we imaged, how we lit the place, all the things that were not survival critical, that's where we took our liberties.
We're also approaching 1 year of, you know, all these families having this anniversary of the death of their loved ones. Tell me about PH. He was a good friend.
Now, PH was a friend, a fellow colleague, fellow explorer. I got him and he got me. We both knew why we went down there, and we went into these dark places and explored and tried to shine our light into history or deep biology or deep geology. You know, he was a natural explorer at heart. We had a kind of a friendly rivalry about who had the most dives at the Titanic wreck site. You know, he had done a lot of the recovery operations there for RMS Titanic, which was the what they call the salver in possession, right?
Yeah.
They had the salvage rights. He orchestrated how they were going to bring up this giant piece of the hull. They did some kind of amazing operations there. So I think he's credited with, I think, 36 dives to the site. I've got 33, you know. So he's a little ahead of me.
It never made sense to me how someone with so much experience would agree to dive with OceanGate knowing the risks.
That's a tricky area for me.
Yeah.
But I have to remind myself that PH wasn't an engineer per se. He was an explorer at heart. It was up to somebody else to design the vehicle and so on. I think you could look at it as would people have gotten into the sub if PH wasn't on board saying it was okay. I think that gets into a tricky area. I also know his heart, which was to go, which was to dive. And all of his previous history was in subs that were certified. And, you know, I think that distinction wasn't as big in his mind as it would have been to me. That's all I can say there.
He would have known, though, the risks. He would have known there was, you know, 0 chance of rescue down there if something did go wrong.
True, true. And you don't count on rescue. I mean, when I was at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, there wasn't another vehicle on the planet at the time that could go that deep. So I knew there wasn't even, not only would there be no rescue, there wouldn't even be a recovery. There probably wouldn't even be a visual investigation because there was no other vehicle that could get there.
It was too far down.
You know, when Aldrin and Armstrong landed on the moon, they knew nobody was going to get there. They were the only ones that had ever been there. So it's a bit like that. Now, Titanic's a different story. Titanic's about 1/3 of that depth. Diving to Titanic depth was, I don't want to say routine, but it almost got to be routine for me after 33 dives.
I bet.
You trust your equipment. Can things go wrong? Of course they can. You're working around a wreck with strong swirling currents, big chunks of steel kind of hanging out. You know, I mean, you can get into trouble diving a shipwreck at any depth. But the one thing you should never have to worry about is your pressure boundary failing. You shouldn't have to worry about that. That should have been, you know, way in the past. It's gone through pressure chamber. It's gone through design, finite element analysis. We spent 6 years designing our hull and going through computer simulations and stress field analysis and all that because you could plug numbers into a finite element analysis computer model with steel or with titanium or with ceramic, but you can't plug those numbers in with composite and know for sure.
I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but what is the allure, what is the pull of the Titanic and of the deep ocean that pulls people like yourself and PH? You know, he had 30+ dives and he just, as you said, he just wanted to go back. He wanted to keep diving.
Titanic is like a fractal. At first you think you see the pattern, and then when you get closer and closer, you realize there are whole other patterns and whole other details that emerge. It's simultaneously, you know, the most described and most well understood major disaster probably in history, and yet there are still mysteries. So I could make up a whole list of things I would want to go back and explore. At a certain point, I had to make myself comfortable with the fact that I didn't need to explore it anymore. I was far enough down the fractal to satisfy me in my lifetime. In fact, we're still just writing up all of our results now in a couple of, you know, hopefully comprehensive papers that represent coming up on 30 years of investigation. My first dive to Titanic, first dives, it was a series of 11 dives, were in 1995.
Wow.
So, and it was also a bit different in 95. It had just been discovered a decade earlier. It was relatively unexplored, and there was a real excitement around that. You get to the point where it's been well explored. Now you're asking a slightly different question. Why are people who are not going to shed any new light on history or archaeology going down there?
Yeah.
Like the people who paid money to do it in the Titan sub. And the answer is to touch history. You know, I don't think they thought they were going to become part of history, but it's to touch history, to experience it, to bear witness, to see the power of the place. Why would you go to Gettysburg? Why would you go to the beaches in Normandy? Why would you go to any of these historic, tragic places to feel it?
There was a backlash at the time, wasn't there? I mean, that kind of public criticism about the billionaire's joyride to the Titanic.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
you know, who does the ocean belong to? Should it be more accessible?
Look, I don't have any problem with people. I mean, the Mir submersibles were chartered for almost 15 years to give rides to people who wanted to pay a couple $100,000 to go and bear witness at the Titanic wreck site themselves, and they operated perfectly safely. You know, I'm close friends with the guy that did that tourist operation. Some archaeology, some marine forensics was done occasionally. For the most part, it was just people who wanted to go and see it with their own eyes. And that had been going on for a long time. When the Mir submersibles were retired, there was nobody to fill that void, and OceanGate stepped into that space.
Just briefly on back on PH, we're speaking to his daughter, but she has told us that she's never been contacted by OceanGate. Never once. Does that surprise you?
I think, look, I can opine on that. An apology is an admission of guilt and lawsuits and, investigations, all that sort of thing. I can't speak to that. It's not honorable, I would say it's not honorable. They should have talked to her. But, really it would have been Stockton Rush's job to do that, and he was his own victim as well.
Is this a case of the person who should be prosecuted is, in fact, already dead?
Yeah, I think the tragedy is he took others with him. Look, I get the exploration fever. The astronauts called it go fever. Let's go. They'd be in some kind of a hold on the pad, maybe quite legitimate hold, checking systems. Maybe they were about to scrub the mission, and the astronauts would be saying, let's go. Let's just go. They'd make a decision for themselves. But they're not really thinking clearly about the families, the expense, the impact on the entire program, the impact on scientific investigation that affects everybody, which is why NASA wisely didn't listen to the astronauts and they would scrub the mission.
I know that was a real concern of yours and others at the time, a year ago. What would be the impact on the broader submersible community? How has it impacted the industry?
All of the institutional subs are still diving, and some of them dive, 100 times a year or more. They're out there, they're doing their jobs, they come back in, they get reclassified, they go back out. I'm a small participant in a company called Triton, which is the biggest and best builder of commercial submersibles, deep diving submersibles, for tourism, for scientific research, and that sort of thing. And there's been a slight cooling effect that's rebounding, right? Because people realize that safety is relatively simple when you boil it down to there's a classifying agency that will look at every nut, every bolt, every fastener, every procedure, every safety system. And if they say it's good to go, it's good to go. You can get in it. And the truth is, you're probably more at risk getting into an Uber with a driver you don't know than getting into a classified submersible.
Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you can look at the stats on this. Nobody does because it's a better headline to make it all about, ooh, big scary stuff. But the truth is, you've got a half a century record of perfect safety, meaning no deaths, no major injuries, up until this tragedy, right? Which is why I say it's an outlier, because they didn't play by the rules.
He was just so rogue.
Yeah.
And reckless.
Reckless with other people's safety, I would say, and his own, There's a lot of things, look, sometimes explorers go do crazy stuff, and sometimes they succeed. And sometimes you can get a little infected by that mentality of, oh, I'm going to go because it's fear that's holding everybody else back. But it's not fear. It's common sense. It's caution, and it's a deep knowledge of the engineering.
Yeah, he said, Stockton Rush, if you're not breaking the rules, you're not innovating.
Well, innovation by definition is doing something new. That's sort of what the definition of innovation is, right? But doing something new isn't necessarily in and of itself a good thing.
When you look at that note that you made on the day in the hotel that you're in, how does it make you feel? I mean, do you still feel shocked that have you come to terms with it, I suppose, is what I'm asking? Do you have a level of understanding and acceptance now? Or do you still have those feelings of, my God?
Well, look, at the moment that I was writing this down at 9:25 in the morning on the Monday morning, I didn't know about the whole kind of media cycle that was to come. At that moment, I had a silent moment because I knew pH very well, and pH is how we'd say it because he's French, right? You know, so it was a somber moment, and then it just transformed into this crazy thing. A guy called me who was an astronaut who was friends with Hamish's wife, and this was on the Wednesday. I said, "This is out of control." I said, "What are you telling her?" He said, "Well, I'm trying to manage her expectation." I said, "Well, tell her that he's dead, because that's the truth." I felt confident enough to say that. And I got hounded by the media to make a statement, because I'm an expert on diving and Titanic, both, which are two separate subjects that happen to converge in this story.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to be the one to take upon myself that responsibility when there are many agencies involved who should have been responsible for that.
And you
so
feel
I
they
stayed
should...
out of it until the exact moment that it was announced, at which point Robert Ballard and I had been talking all week. We decided to do a joint statement at that moment.
But you feel they should have done it sooner?
We feel that the Coast Guard or any of the investigative agencies involved should have done.
Just finally, you've spent so much time, I think you said you've spent more time at the Titanic wreck than the actual captain spent on the ship.
Yeah, if you do the math, it actually is true.
You've been to the deepest part of the ocean. What is left to explore? What's next?
Oh, so much. I mean, the point of building a Hadal depth sub, which is the deep sub, right, going 3 times deeper than Titanic, if you can go to the deepest spot, you can go to any of the really deep spots. So if you add up all the deep trenches in the world, it's an area bigger than Australia, absolutely unexplored, or very, very little explored. You know, saying that you've explored the Challenger Deep on a single dive or even a handful of dives is like doing a night parachute into Wyoming and looking around with a flashlight for a few hours and saying you've explored it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or the Nullarbor, let's say, right? You parachute into the Nullarbor at night, look around with a flashlight for a couple of hours and say you've explored Australia. So there's every single time you dive into a place no one's looked, you find new species, you find things that nobody's ever seen before, clearly, and there's so much investigation still to be done, you know. So would I love to go back and do more of that? Yeah, I just got to get these damn Avatar films done.
And you feel, I suppose, that this OceanGate tragedy hasn't affected that long-term ocean exploration?
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, exploration will proceed because it must, and because it's part of the human spirit, right? And, you know, a knucklehead that made a mistake shouldn't be holding everybody else back, and it won't, right? We have plans at Triton to build a sub that can go to 4,000 meters, and we will.
Wow.
And I may even go back to Titanic in that sub, just to prove the point that if it's done right, it can be done safely.
Amazing. Jim, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Great questions.
Fascinating to talk to you.
2 years ago this past week, the United States Coast Guard was tasked with leading the search for the submersible Titan, missing on an expedition to the wreck of the Titanic. At first, there was hope the experimental craft could be rescued. But sadly, we now know 90 minutes into its journey, 3 kilometres below the surface, Titan imploded. All 5 men on board were killed. Among them was Stockton Rush, the boss of OceanGate, the company which built the doomed sub. Not surprisingly, he's been a focus of the Coast Guard's investigation into what went wrong. Its official report is expected imminently, but already this disaster seems to be a case of ego overruling expertise. There's something soothing about the British countryside. The tranquility and fresh air are exactly what Christine Darwood needs to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
I think if I would have told them to come, they would have walked with me too. Yeah.
You wouldn't know it when you first meet her, but beneath Christine's big smile and infectious enthusiasm, this wife and mother has been to hell and back. Her husband, Shahzada, and 19-year-old son, Suleiman, were on board OceanGate's Titan submersible when it imploded while descending to the Titanic wreck.
If you would have lost them in any other accident, you know, the outcome would have been the same. They would have been gone, the rooms would be empty. But the whole public nature of it was very, very difficult.
Rescuers are racing to find the missing dive vessel.
But the US Coast Guard is not letting up.
Tonight, explosive new details from the US Coast Guard investigation. OceanGate insiders on why years of warnings were ignored.
There is failure on every level.
And why no one could stop the boss of the operation, Stockton Rush.
And wondered if he was borderline a psychopath.
Christine Darwood is still trying to process the sudden and horrific loss of her loved ones. When we catch up with her, roughly halfway through an 800-kilometre hike from London to Glasgow, she's weary but determined. This was a walk she'd planned to do with her son, Suleiman. Why did you decide to do this walk?
He messaged me one day and he says, "Mother, is it possible to walk from London to Glasgow, where his university was?" And I'm like, "Sure you can. I mean, you know, you can walk that." So after the tragedy, we wanted to plan, but he wanted to walk simply because he loved walking, and so we thought it would be a nice thing to walk together.
A mother-son bonding experience that wasn't to be.
We loved talking about life. Sometimes your mind does go into a dark place. Sometimes it becomes so overwhelming that you have to stop and then just sit down and either talk about it with the people around you who know you, or sometimes you cry.
Was Suleiman adventurous by nature?
He was very wise for his age. He was a people's person. You could have a really fun time, like laugh until your belly hurts. But you could also sit with him and have like more serious conversations. He was just generally a very, curious, open person.
It was that sense of curiosity that prompted the teenager to join his dad, London businessman Shahzada Dawood, on board OceanGate's tourist submersible for a deep-sea dive to the Titanic. Christine had planned to go with her husband, but when Suleiman turned 18, he asked his parents if he could go in her place.
It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
On June 18, 2023, along with British billionaire Hamish Harding and dive veteran Paul-Henri Nargeolet, they set off on what was to be an epic undersea adventure, with OceanGate's maverick CEO, Stockton Rush, at the helm.
Taking a completely new approach to the sub design, and it's all run with this game controller and these touch screens. So if you want to go forward, you press forward. If you want to go back, you go back. And it's meant for a 16-year-old to throw it around, and super durable. We keep a couple of spares on board just in case.
The passengers, who OceanGate called mission specialists, each paid more than $250,000 for their place in history.
Officials say that the sub went missing about an hour and 45 minutes into its descent.
We now know their adventure and their lives ended a mere 90 minutes into the dive. But at the time, a frantic international search and rescue operation swung into full force, scouring the ocean for the missing Titan, as the world's media speculated about how much oxygen might be left on board.
We're told at this point it could be anywhere from about 54 to 80 hours of oxygen left.
It was 4 days before the US Coast Guard confirmed what many feared.
The all-out search for a missing submersible with 5 people on board leads to a tragic discovery, and there are no survivors.
For the past 2 years, the US Coast Guard has been examining every aspect of OceanGate's operations to determine what caused the tragedy and who, if anyone, should be held accountable. What it's revealed so far is staggering.
During 13 successful dives to the Titanic in 2021 and 2022, the Titan had close to 120 equipment issues, including failing batteries, problems with its thrusters and the hull. But even before then, there were clear signs of trouble. Trouble that boss Stockton Rush refused to acknowledge.
We've learned that things inside OceanGate were a lot worse than any of us ever suspected. Every sub they built, test or operational, displayed the same pattern, and they just ignored it. The sub was screaming at them, but nobody was listening.
Few people know the perils of deep-sea exploration as well as Rob McCallum. A world-renowned submersible expert, Rob has led several expeditions to the Titanic. He consulted for OceanGate from 2009, but left the company in 2016 over safety issues. What was your main concern about the design of Titan?
The core problem here is that carbon fibre is not an appropriate material for massive compression stresses like you find in a deep diving submarine. And, you know, it could be that the hull was flexing against the titanium end caps in a manner that allowed failure of the pressure vessel. It could be that the titanium ring that was put onto the hull, the way it was glued in, failed. It could be that the carbon fibre itself just had a weakness in it and ruptured, but it doesn't change the outcome. And this was something that was absolutely avoidable. It was well predicted years in advance.
I've broken some rules to make this. Carbon fiber and titanium, there's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did. It's picking the rules that you break that are the ones that will add value to others and add value to society.
Cost cutting, bad engineering decisions, the desire to get to the Titanic as quickly as they could to start making profit.
The construction was a concern for many former OceanGate employees who gave evidence at the Coast Guard public hearing.
We all voiced concerns about what was happening in terms of the engineering of Titan.
The company's former head of marine operations, Dave Lockridge, raised serious safety issues about the vessel's hull in 2018 and was promptly sacked. Another harsh critic of the OceanGate operation is submersible builder Carl Stanley. He told the Coast Guard he heard the hull of the Titan cracking on a test dive with Stockton Rush in 2019, 4 years before the tragedy.
We got down there and it's making noises that, you know, the sound of a carbon fiber band breaking.
Days after the 2023 implosion, he described to 60 Minutes the terrifying sound that still haunts him.
I would say every 3 to 4 minutes there was loud gunshot-like noises. That's a heck of a sound to hear when you're that far under the ocean in a craft that has only been down that deep once before.
Carl's experience so affected him that, like Dave Lockridge and Rob McCallum, he told Stockton Rush in no uncertain terms his vessel wouldn't be fit to take passengers, and pushing forward with Titanic tourism dives would likely end in catastrophe. But as you'll see, nothing and no one could convince Stockton Rush to slow down. Not even his own engineering director.
He wanted to do something different, and he wanted to make a name for himself. I often wondered, just in his actions, if he was borderline a psychopath.
Despite countless safety warnings from OceanGate insiders and industry experts, on June 18, 2023, the Titan submersible set off to the Titanic wreck, piloted by Stockton Rush and carrying 4 paying passengers.
Titan, topside, Titan.
Monitoring their dive from support ship, the Polar Prince, was the company's tracking and communications team. including Stockton's wife and OceanGate director, Wendy Rush.
See where it moves around.
In this video, recently tendered to the US Coast Guard investigation, Wendy hears a sudden pop.
400 meters to go.
It should be about 500 meters, 30. What was that thing?
You could blink and miss it, but this is the fatal moment the Titan was lost. For submersible expert Rob McCallum, it's distressing to watch. It's quite eerie in hindsight, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, she's heard the bang, but she doesn't understand where it's come from. Ships are noisy places, but if you know what an implosion sounds like, it sounds exactly like that.
Titan dropped 2 weights.
Copy. Titan dropped 2 weights.
After hearing the bang, the monitoring team reported that the sub had dropped weights.
So he meant to go down fairly light.
It was normal procedure, but within moments, the Titan's communication and tracking system went dark.
Roger that. Thank you for confirming.
4 days later, the obliterated remains of the Titan were found on the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. What was left of the vessel and the 5 men on board came to rest just 500 metres from their intended destination, the wreck of the mighty Titanic.
100% avoidable. 100% avoidable. They had the data in front of them.
As OceanGate's chief engineer from 2016 to 2019, Tony Nissen worked closely with Stockton Rush. He built the Titan's first carbon fibre hull and implemented a monitoring system to detect if the structure was compromised. Back then, Tony and Stockton Rush were joined by engineers from Boeing to test the Titan's hull under pressure. A new Netflix documentary about the disaster shows the results were alarming.
Let's just see how she settles down, but that's a lot of events.
Yeah, you don't want to.
Okay.
Where did it go to?
Went to 4,000. Yeah, about 4,009.
So at least you know acoustic monitoring works.
What is happening?
Ideally in acoustic or in carbon fiber structures, when they break or they crack, which they will, when put under tension or compression, any kind of load, you will get some breakage. Eventually it should stop. Will send off a noise, a pop. There's glue is separating and fibers are breaking. It's just that simple, and it's loud. And so Stockton and I, we kind of looked at each other and thought, oh my God, that's louder than we thought it was going to be.
I would say that was it.
Surprisingly, Tony says he had no concerns about the Titan's construction or safety because the monitoring system worked. Would you say you were confident with the build and you were confident with the engineering and you were confident with the hull? You weren't concerned about those things?
No.
Despite the noises, the acoustic monitoring?
Those were expected. What we wanted to see was an attenuation or a reduction in the number of them, and we were starting to see that. The hull was built with a meaningful safety factor. The data didn't concern me. The strain data didn't concern me. It was working like it was intended to work.
But his confidence wouldn't last when testing went from the lab to the ocean, with Stockton at the helm.
I've never heard a noise so horrific. I can't imagine what it would have been like inside the sub itself. That's the sound of your death approaching. That at any second, that hull is going to implode. And it did.
For Rob McCallum, that was the moment OceanGate should have pulled the sub out of the water for good.
I don't know anybody in the professional field that would have got into that submersible. And if they had, Once they heard those sounds, they'd still be running now. It's absolutely terrifying sound.
And what do you say to those who would say the testing system was doing its job? Every submersible makes noises at depth.
I mean, that's just not the case. I've been as deep as it's possible for a human being to go, and the sub was absolutely silent because it was made of titanium. When you are hearing those particular sounds, which are the sounds of the hull itself under great stress, that's alarming. You just never know when it's going to fail, but it is a certainty that it will fail.
But Tony vehemently disagrees.
The entire vehicle worked like it was supposed to. It gave me the data that I could interpret to prevent an accident.
He wasn't concerned by the noises, but he was worried when other measurements showed the hull was degrading. Stockton Rush, though, insisted he could still take passengers all the way down to the Titanic. By 2019, Tony knew they had a serious problem and had to act.
The data that I was looking at was it's moving more than it should. It was making more noise than we thought it would. And that's why I canceled or did not let Stockton go to Titanic in 2019.
He took his concerns to Stockton Rush and, like many employees before him, was sacked.
He wanted me to be the pilot that runs the Titanic missions. And I told him I'm not getting in it.
Tony remains furious. He told the Coast Guard inquiry he believed in the project and felt the problems could have been fixed. He says OceanGate's culture was the real reason for the disaster. What could have stopped this?
They shouldn't have fired me. Like, we built a system that did exactly what they ordered and prevented this tragedy from happening a few years earlier. And we were brave enough to do so. And it worked. It 100% worked. And I think, and that's not being addressed anywhere.
The chief investigator of the US Coast Guard will hand down his report within weeks. He's told us the entire OceanGate operation was dysfunctional, and he's been especially stunned by the fact that in the years leading up to the implosion, there was a total lack of maintenance carried out on the Titan's hull. He says if Stockton Rush were alive today, the Coast Guard would recommend a manslaughter charge. The question now is whether members of OceanGate's board or members of staff who failed to act will be held accountable.
For those suffering the consequences of Stockton Rush's reckless ambition, there's no outcome that would ease their grief.
The loss was so great, that the pain was so big, that I rather wanted to concentrate on the positives and the things also that I could control. I have the power to be grateful. I didn't want to get bitter.
Christine Darwood tries not to dwell on what happened to her husband and son, Shahzada and Suleiman, in the doomed submersible.
My son was the light, right? So I have to carry his light forward. Finding new purpose is, I think, a key. I think Suleiman would be quite proud of me. Yeah.
Would you like to see criminal charges recommended? Does that help you and your family in any way?
I just don't want this to happen again. If that needs to happen in order to change policies, then yes.
You can only use the word accident when it's something that was unexpected and initially unexplained. But in this case, this was predicted, and anything that's predictable is avoidable. And I want that to be the last word on OceanGate, that if you decide that you're going to do your own thing and take on every risk, there are consequences, and they are severe.
Welcome back to the program. Mention the name Clive Palmer and everything that comes to mind is big. Big money, big ideas, big opinions. One of Australia's richest men, he's also one of the most outspoken. But what he loves even more than a good stoush is a grand idea, and his latest is Titanic. Titanic 2, to be precise. You see, he's building an updated, near-perfect replica of the legendary luxury cruise liner that sank 100 years ago. Clive doesn't know what it'll cost, and in typical Clive style, he doesn't seem to care. Welcome to the Big Apple.
Come through. Lovely.
Tonight, the larger-than-life billionaire from down under has put on a black tie to romance New York's rich and famous.
When the day comes, and it most surely will, when Titanic 2 sails into New York, you'll be able to say that you were here tonight when it all began.
He wants to convince all the non-believers that his cockeyed dream of building Titanic 2 is about to happen, and that they should all jump on board the Palmer Love Boat.
What do you say to skeptics, those who say, he's a dreamer, he's not going to do it?
Well, I don't hear them, Ray.
You don't?
Because I've always gone against the tide. I've had different ideas. That's just how I think, I guess.
But do you like being different, eccentric?
Oh, well, you know, I am who I am. I don't think I'm eccentric when I look in the mirror every morning and have a shave. I say, am I looking at an eccentric person? I don't think so, right? I just say that, why is it eccentric to take up the challenge?
Building a new Titanic may be the boldest of Clive Palmer's crazy ideas. Maybe. How about a life-size T-Rex? Turning one of Australia's top golf courses into Jurassic Park.
Can I actually just ask you a question? A famous Queenslander once said, please explain.
He's our salesman, Ray, because he's the symbol of the resort here, and he's got a great backdrop with Coolan Mountain there.
It's classic Clive Palmer business strategy. He picked up this struggling five-star resort for an absolute song. He changed its name to the Palmer Coolan Resort and then sacked 3/4 of the staff. With Palmer lodging, he says, he's saving jobs.
The people who owned it, I think, were going to close it down because it was losing $15 to $20 million a year. So the question really was, do you save those 250 jobs which are really legitimate here?
I guess I would like to describe him as an ordinary person, but he's probably not anything but ordinary.
Anything but ordinary. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm ordinary, Ray. So I don't know what all the fuss is about, really.
The tiles?
What's the chandelier, Ray? Because it's the...
Life at home with his wife Anna at their Gold Coast mansion is certainly anything but ordinary.
Now that's a big chandelier, isn't it? And that was here?
That was here, yeah.
That was here.
We'd never put something as ostentatious here, Ray, as that. We'd have a little light. If you come down here, Ray, you'll see all our photos.
It's the first time this very private couple has opened up their inner sanctum.
There's a President Tahitian Billy Clinton over there, right?
And do you find him as sexy as your husband?
Oh, no, I find my husband very sexy.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Gosh.
Absolutely.
What did you pay for this?
Good to take you out here in your high heels.
They're not that high.
Clive and Anna came together in the wake of two personal tragedies. They had both lost their spouses to cancer in the same week.
That's okay.
And the Turkish brow, that would be incredible.
And during the early courtship, Clive undersold just how rich he really was, for fear of frightening her off.
I told her that I had an aeroplane, and Anna said to her girlfriends that she thought I was a nice person, but I lied a lot to try to impress her. You know, of course I did lie. I had 5 aeroplanes. But I thought if I told her I had 5, she might think I was a bit too much. So
you had no idea how wealthy he was when you first started dating him?
I guess it wasn't really relevant to me. And if he had gone overboard to try and impress me, it would have had the opposite effect at the time.
Is that Anna? Is that your hair?
I used to be very blonde.
Used to be blonde, yeah.
Really?
Born in Bulgaria, Anna has degrees in law and accountancy.
There's Mary kicking a soccer ball.
Together they have Mary, who is now 5. And with 2 adult kids from his first marriage, the outrageous Clive sometimes surprises you with a moment of reflection.
Yeah, I regret that I didn't spend more time with my first wife and I wasn't as sensitive as I could have been as a person, right? I tried to do my best in the circumstances. I'm sure a lot of Australians are in the same way, but I regret that. But that can't stop me going ahead. There's a nice one of Kevin Rudd and me after the mining tax debacle.
There are in fact 2 Clive Palmers, the very private man and the publicity-loving, headline-hunting maverick.
That's what the National Trust gave me. You've seen it now, you can say that.
It's only here at home that you see both Clives on parade.
Living national treasure.
That's right, yeah, by the National Trust, certified. So don't touch me, Ray. Don't touch me. Don't get too close, don't breathe. All the coal comes in from over there. This is where we've got our ore.
In Townsville, this national treasure is hailed as a lifesaver.
So I'm just looking forward to the day when I can retire and play bowls at the Gold Coast.
You don't really want to do that. You'll never do that, mate.
I don't know.
In typical fashion, he bought this BHP nickel processing plant at a bargain basement price. He quickly turned it around, delivered record profits, and saved 1,000 local jobs.
Does this make you feel good, make you feel proud when you look at this?
Well, it makes me feel that we as Australians can do it. We can show the world what we want to be.
So is this the biggest crane in Townsville or not?
That's the biggest crane in Townsville.
Palmer's fortune comes from his nickel investments, from a vast real estate portfolio, and Chinese royalties on his iron ore in the Pilbara of WA. He holds untapped coal reserves in Queensland, along with oil and gas fields in Papua New Guinea. And he bristles at any suggestion that he's not really a miner.
But do you dig anything yet?
Yeah, we do. We're digging it right now. I spent 15 years in the desert living in a tent, mate, to discover all of that. And I designed it, planned it, did it, and executed it. You know, so that's our project.
Do you call yourself a mining magnate or a real estate mogul?
Well, I call myself an Australian that cares about other Australians and wants to keep them in work.
Do you want to run the country? Would you be PM?
Well, I don't know whether I could do that, Ray, be Prime Minister. My wife would probably shoot me. But the most important thing is I want governments to realise that and to be focused on not just taking money, but also creating money and creating jobs. In the media, they saw me saying a lot of things, you know, and they think, well, I'm just a big mouth talking.
You like a fight, don't you?
Well, I don't avoid the truth, right? I've had about 68 stoushes in my life in court and won 68 of them.
168?
Yeah. So I'm highly likely to lose the next one.
Turbocharged Clive has shown there are no toys that he can't buy.
Good morning, Mr. Palmer. Good morning, thanks.
Resorts, private planes, hundreds of vintage cars.
What's it worth, the whole collection?
The total collection will be 20, 25 million.
What's your favourite one?
And as he's doing with Titanic 2, if it's not there to buy, then this self-made man will just go ahead and build it.
People discriminate against me every day by saying I'm a fat bastard or whatever, right? And you read
fat
that
rich bastard.
Who knows why? But they don't ask me to talk. They don't even know who I am.
You had 40 million by the time you're 27.
Yeah, something like that, right? Something inconsequential.
Something, a mere 40 million.
Yeah. This is the first class entrance, and that's the ballroom. Of course, all this will be air conditioned.
Clive's ship of dreams, Titanic 2, will be built in China, starting in June of this year and setting sail in 2016. Plotting the original course from Southampton to New York.
This is about recreating the experience of Titanic 1. It's a ship that has a life of its own. And worldwide, people love it.
What's it going to cost?
Oh, well, it'll cost as much as it cost, Ray. You know,
100 million? 500 million?
Well, I don't know. I think I'll have enough, Ray, to do it. And if I don't, I'll ask you to lend me some money.
Is it about dreams or about making money?
We'll make a lot of money, but hopefully that's a byproduct. You see, you never should worry about how much money you make. You should always worry about doing it for the right reasons and doing a good job.
Meanwhile, back in New York, there's a love story to sell. If Clive Palmer manages to pull off this monumental Titanic 2 folly of his, and many people doubt that he will, then his brand new ocean liner will finish up here at the famous Pier 54. This is where the original Titanic was supposed to dock.
Coal, and they don't want to do it, you know?
As a place to spruik his latest dream to New York's A-list, Clive has chosen the USS Intrepid, a retired aircraft carrier, complete with a brace of fighter jets. But you pretty much conquered Australia. You don't want to conquer the world?
Well, I don't see life in that way, or conquering anything, you know? I don't see conquering as being important. What's important is trying to do the right thing by people and creating a service, if you can, for the community, and that's what we've done.
Like everything Clive does, tonight's venue is over the top. But when you've got a squillion in your ATM, well, hang the cost. Have you got any idea what you're worth?
I have, Ray, yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
But you know, Forbes magazine says that you're only worth 750 million. Others say 5 billion. Somewhere in between?
Well, I don't think you can rely on Forbes, you know, so I don't think they're right. And I think, you know, it's a bit more than that, but certainly, yeah, a lot more than that. You can multiply that a bit.
Clive may be our wealthiest man. And when you're paid for the party, then why not dance the Manhattan night away? Even if to 18-year-old daughter Emily... Does he embarrass you sometimes?
Every day. Every
day. He's such a dad.
At my school, in high school, there's two lanes to pick people up, and then Dad would just come in the middle in like Maserati, like makes very loud sound, like right in the middle of school, so everyone can see me.
Is he getting better at this, or is he just getting worse as you get older?
I think getting worse, I would say.
I love Australian people. I love him. He's a great guy. God bless him. God bless him. I had a body like that once, Ray. It's all gone now.
Is that right? This quintessential Queenslander says he's making so much money right now that he can't spend it all.
It's not about money, Ray. I keep trying to convince you. It's about the experience.
But the one-time Gold Coast real estate agent sees nothing in Times Square that he wants to buy. There are bigger and better things to build back home. Could you live here?
No, I think I'm an Aussie, mate. I like living in Australia. That's my home. I'm an Australian, you know? Good, bad or ugly, that's who I am, you know?
Is money a motivation?
Not really, not at all.
Was it ever?
Never.
When you were broke?
Never for me, right?
Were you driven by ego?
Not really. I don't have an ego, really. But, my mother said to me at a very early age, she said, Clive, she said, you've got 2 arms and 2 legs like everyone else. There's nothing that you can't do.
Mm.
She said, well, life will tell you what you can't do. It's best for you to find out what you can do, and that's what I've been doing. So far, I haven't found out what I can't do, Ray.
James Cameron thinks big, whether directing a movie epic like Titanic or creating the awesome alien world of Avatar. And he loves a challenge when he's away from Hollywood as well. His latest adventure is as sweeping in scope as anything he's conjured for the silver screen. Cameron decided to explore the blackest depths of our oceans, as far as man has ever ventured. It was a treacherous, some might say foolhardy undertaking, but he did it with the help of a little Aussie know-how.
Filmmaker James Cameron is a man who lives life large.
It's been a blast.
Family show, Donnie, family show.
Oh, sorry. It's been a beep blast.
Above all, have fun.
Have fun, exactly.
Just hours earlier, in the dead of night in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, he was about to be the loneliest person on the planet.
Good. See ya. Nice and tight.
In a bizarre-looking craft built to withstand incomprehensible pressure, he begins an incredible journey. More than 11 kilometres to the deepest point of the ocean.
Prime rib, deep sea challenger is launched.
I was probably apprehensive before the dive, but once you get into the process and you're in the countdown and you're going in, way in the back of your mind there's a little voice that says you're being bolted into a sub that's about to go to the deepest place in the world, but you have to tune that voice out.
That's the voice you ignore.
Exactly.
Any dive this deep is a ride into the unknown. As surface light disappears and the temperature nears freezing, an alien world appears. After a 2-hour free fall, James Cameron lands on a muddy, murky ocean floor. A place that's never been seen before.
As I slid across the bottom, there's a big mark down there that I'm sure will be there for another 100 years.
So that's Jim's mark?
That's right. I was trying to spell my name.
It's all a very long way from James Cameron's day job.
Mr. James Cameron!
Of red carpet premieres.
And action!
And calling the shots on film sets. He's the Canadian-born director who has thrilled us with blockbuster
Oh my God.
After blockbuster.
I'm the king of the world!
Action! And it was creating these films that gave him the motivation and the deep pockets for his other great love, deep water exploration.
We're right in the middle of the avalanche.
You couldn't be any further from Hollywood right now.
I couldn't be further from Hollywood and I couldn't be happier. And I don't mean that as a diss of Hollywood, it's just that I have to kind of code switch when I go back into that world.
But the very different worlds of Hollywood and exploration have become inseparable to him.
Oh, say it's not the clock.
It looks like
After making Titanic, he was inspired to dive the real wreck.
Oh yeah, this is the clock we did in the movie.
So he approached his great friend, Australian producer Andrew White.
Oh man, look at this thing.
And together they set out to explore and document the hidden wonders deep below the surface.
You seeing this thing? Look at this. This is like the ugliest fish in the world.
But as with all adventurers, their dreams just got bigger, or in their case, deeper.
Look at this silt we're throwing up. This is the last frontier for exploration on planet Earth. So you've got a whole continent down there that we know nothing about.
Just waiting to be discovered.
Waiting to be discovered.
And the deepest frontier of all is the Mariana Trench near the Philippines. Incredibly, in 1960, a two-man submarine got to the bottom, but wasn't sophisticated enough to collect samples or take so much as a photograph. It was a world still begging to be explored and recorded.
The launching point for this dive is here in Guam, a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. A day's sail away, James Cameron will be going deeper than Mount Everest is high. But this adventure started 7 years ago in the most unlikely of places.
Leichhardt in Sydney's inner west, and nestled amongst its cafes, one of the movie industry's great secrets has been hiding. Ron Allum is a television technician by trade, with a passion for extreme diving.
Do you mind, boy? So this is your baby?
And he's the one man James Cameron would entrust to build his sub.
It's an impressive beast.
Yeah.
Ron's engineering challenge was to create a sub strong enough to withstand the crushing deep, but agile enough to explore the seabed.
I suppose it's, like a rocket. It's designed for vertical travel.
You're pretty clever.
Oh, thank you.
You know it. Do you reckon I can have a look inside?
Yeah, absolutely. Have to climb up
the ladder.
Yeah, that's it.
How much room is there?
It's pretty tight. Okay. Now what you have to do is you have to get your feet towards you and get your bottom down. Yeah, that's it. And then you can lay into that position.
There we go. It's quite cosy in here, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to go to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
But this historic expedition was very nearly cancelled at the very last minute. Just how close it came is a story that hasn't been told until now.
Maybe they can take the ball off. I don't know.
In February, during final tests off the New South Wales south coast, James Cameron's original partner on this whole expedition, Andrew White, along with cameraman Mike Degree, were killed as their chopper took off to film the sub.
It really called everything we were doing into question, because it forces us to kind of stare into the mirror and stare into our own mortality and think about what risk really means. And it took a few days, and everybody sort of thought, well, if we walk away from this, then everything that they worked for and that they stood for is being thrown away.
Finally, after personal tragedy and logistical challenges, it's time for last-minute preparations.
This pond actually has never been dived in until this expedition.
For marine geologist Paddy Fryer, all the excitement is tempered by knowing the risks of heading into such an extreme environment.
Pressure down there is about 16,000 pounds per square inch.
Which kind of means what?
It means take the Eiffel Tower and turn it upside down and put it on your big toe.
That's the kind of pressure we're talking about.
That's the kind of pressure we're talking about.
And this is our hatch, Davin, right here.
And there's another pressure James Cameron has to contend with on his marathon dive.
How do you go to the bathroom?
Well, did you ever go on a long car trip with your parents? And they had
I'm worried where this is
like a
going.
little bottle because they didn't want to pull over. Okay, well,
That's how.
it's like
Okay.
that. Yeah,
All
it is a
right.
little bottle. We call it a range extender.
All right, Jim.
All right, buddy.
Locked down, James Cameron is now completely on his own, in a vessel like no other.
Prime rib, deep sea challenger is launched.
Unlike a conventional sub, the Deep Sea Challenger is tipped on its nose. It has just a small metal sphere for the pilot. The rest of the body is made out of super light, crush-proof foam. Dragging the sub down is half a ton of weights. Releasing them sends it back to the surface.
Yep, just coming into view.
But if anything should go wrong, this untethered craft is well beyond the reach of rescue.
You're in a place that's so remote, nobody can come and help you. I mean, if I got into trouble in Earth orbit, we could always ask the Russians to come and help us, or even the Chinese. There's no help where we went with this vehicle.
All right, we got us a Dumbo. Hoping for this for a while.
On James Cameron's many previous voyages into the deep, he has filmed the bizarre and improbable.
Every single dive, you're going to see something you've never seen before.
But the Mariana Trench is triple those depths again. And here, on the world's deepest ocean floor, the search for life is not unlike exploring on distant planets. It's remote and hostile.
What I find amazing is the fact that more people have walked on the moon than have gone where you just went.
Yeah, it's true. It is amazing, and it's right here on Earth. So I'm down there feeling as isolated as if I was on the far side of the moon by myself. And guess who calls me? My wife. Which just, men out there, if there's any doubt in your mind whatsoever, they will find you.
Pilot coming out. Welcome back.
After a lifetime of dreaming, 7 years building, and untold millions spent, he did it.
This is mud from the Challenger Deep.
And not only that, he brought back some of the trench floor for research.
So this is as precious as gold.
Absolutely.
More so.
You know how much it cost to get that?
It's not much to look at, but for Patty, even the discovery of bacteria in this tiny bag of mud is scientific pay dirt.
This trip has been like Christmas for you,
Oh
hasn't it?
gosh, I'll say it certainly has.
35 years
Christmas in April.
of studying this trench, and you've learnt more in the last 2 weeks.
Oh, it's amazing. It really has been a trip.
And it won't be the last.
I can't believe this was your home for 55 days.
55 days, yeah.
In the extraordinary life of James Cameron, you get the sense that an even bolder adventure is never far away.
So do you consider yourself more an explorer than a filmmaker, or?
Tough question to answer. When I'm making a film, I think about exploring. When I'm exploring, I think about making a film. The grass is always greener on the other side. No, I don't make me choose. I want it all.
As the director of some of the biggest Hollywood blockbusters ever made, think The Terminator, Titanic and Avatar, James Cameron is used to yelling action, but he also lives for it. Cameron spends the millions he's made from movies exploring the deepest depths of the Earth's oceans. It's a highly dangerous pastime, but he gets to visit places no one has ever been to before. And as he tells the Nine Network's US correspondent, Robert Penfold, what he's discovered on the floor of the world is an extraordinary film set with a cast of mystical stars you have to see to believe.
200 units of down thrust in, just easing down.
While most of us know Jim Cameron as the filmmaker who creates extraordinary alien worlds for Hollywood,
touchdown. Surface, I am on the bottom.
His own imagination is nothing compared to the real-life alien-like creatures he's met in the darkest depths of our oceans.
All right, we got us a Dumbo. Hoping for this for a while.
They don't know how beautiful they are. You know, it's pitch black. You know, he probably knows some other octopus, but has never seen them. And we come along with our bright lights, and we get to bear witness to something that's just, that party's going on down there all the time, but we only see it very rarely.
What a beautiful animal, look at that. Like a dancer.
In the rarefied circles of deep-sea exploration, this 63-year-old is revered as much for his bravery as his knowledge. His journeys, kilometres down to the ocean floor, aren't for the faint-hearted or the claustrophobic. But once there, the rewards are obvious.
Those are the moments that I really crave. I call it bearing witness. I get have some capital, some working capital. Why not put it into your dream? Test, 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 1, 2, 3, 4. First recorded dialogue, underwater, on film, for a theatrical motion picture in the history of the world.
Even as a boy, Cameron's gaze was drawn to what lay beneath the ocean, but the world first saw this deep-sea explorer's fantasy in his film, The Abyss.
I need you to be closer to the camera. I need to have the shot cut right about here.
The story was about the discovery of an alien civilization in the ocean's uncharted depths. "30 years on, it's eerily similar to his own contact with creatures previously unknown or barely ever glimpsed.
Look at this thing, this is incredible.
Like this jellyfish called Deepstaria enigmatica, which Cameron caught on camera for the first time.
It was a couple meters in diameter. It was this big, very diaphanous, almost looked like someone had thrown away a silk scarf, just drifting. And as you got closer to it, you realized that it was a coherent creature. It was a beautiful animal, absolutely like something that you might see on another world, which I think of the deep ocean as another world. That is amazing. And in it...
To make The Abyss, Cameron built an enormous above-ground tank and dived in at the deep end.
I was spending anywhere from 8 to 10 hours a day submerged. And that was a strange thing, to come back to the surface and re-experience gravity.
I'm not sure if it's surprising or not, but being 20 meters underwater for weeks and weeks was the incentive Jim needed to make Titanic.
I'm the king of the world!
You've got to see the beating heart of the ship, because it's a living thing, it's a living presence. Yeah, go ahead. So you can see this, how massive these crankshafts would be.
In 1911, Titanic was the world's greatest ship. In 1997, it became the world's greatest movie.
20 years later, and the handprint is still there in the steamy window.
When it was released, Jim joked that the then most expensive movie of all time was his way of getting to dive to the Titanic itself. And since then, he's done it 11 times, including one trip when fact and fiction intersected.
It looks like a clock to me. It is not the clock on the mantle. Oh my God. We used a photograph of that suite as a guide for the suite that Rose is staying in. And Jack walks in, he goes straight to the fireplace, he looks at the gold clock. So to go into the room and see the clock actually still there, as we imagined it, was this very surreal ellipse between art imitating life, life imitating art, you know. I mean, it was a very dreamlike experience.
The wreck of the Titanic, 4 kilometres down, has almost become Cameron's personal shrine.
Whoa!
I've actually spent more time on the Titanic wreck than the captain spent on the ship.
Is it terribly sad to sit there and look at it?
I think there's a feeling that it's sacred ground, that it's a monument that means a great deal to people symbolically about the price of human hubris and arrogance.
Titanic earned over $2 billion at the box office and helped make Jim Cameron rich beyond belief.
I'm at the trench wall. I am working a steep rock cliff, over.
It's money he's now spent on his greatest challenge, exploring the deepest place on the planet.
Oh, what's that?
The so-called Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench off Guam. It's 11 kilometres down.
Where I'm targeted right now should be the deepest place on the planet.
There's of course an element of fear in it because it's a risk.
It's only ever been seen by 2 other humans in 1960 in a massive submersible.
It was a dive into history, but no one has been back since.
But in 2012, Jim dived solo in a submarine a tenth of that size. One designed to descend vertically and at speed.
Let's scream down through the water column, spend our time slowly looking around, exploring, mapping, collecting on the bottom, and then scream back up. So that's why most subs look like that, and our sub looked like that.
I'm struck by the sheer courage it must have taken to get in that thing and go down 11 kilometres knowing that there was no rescue for you really if it all went wrong.
Yeah, I think with most manned submersible operations or piloted submersible operations, rescue is very difficult. But when you know categorically that you're going sort of almost twice as deep as any other sub in the world can go, the possibility of rescue is zero. When you're building equipment for the deep ocean, there's no second take.
More people have been on the moon than down here, and while Jim remained coolly calm, his support crew up above, including wife Susie Amos, were anxious.
Surface, this is Deep Sea Challenger. I am on the bottom.
When you hit the bottom, did you just want to celebrate? Was there a lot of yelling and screaming coming down?
Yeah, I pulled that champagne out of the cup holder that I had right there. No,
yeah.
There was, well, I could visualize the jubilation in the control room up on the ship.
Oh my God!
And your wife was up there?
Yeah.
What did she say? Get up here fast.
No,
You've had your fun.
Susie's very supportive, and she sort of grabbed the microphone from the from the communicator.
Deep Sea Challenger, Deep Sea Challenger. Godspeed to you, baby. I love you.
Love you too, baby.
I didn't expect to hear her voice because we're astronauts. We're very calm and disciplined and so on. So that was a nice surprise.
And now Jim Cameron's deep sea treasures are coming to Australia. A world premiere exhibition at the Australian National Maritime Museum in Sydney, which opens tomorrow. A fitting tribute for a man who stands in the shoes of the great explorers of history and whose fictional achievements have made him, well,
King of the world!
Have you got to the point where you're weighing things up about your greatest achievements? Is it the amazing movies that you've made, all the awards that you've been given, or is it the exploration that you've been involved in and where you've gone down so deep and you've been able to come up and tell people about things that we've never seen before?
I think weighing it up, I'm probably more proud of the expedition work, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I love making movies, don't get me wrong.
It must have been a big thrill, that big night.
Well, I mean, sure. Let's see. There's the moment when I won 3 Oscars for Titanic, and there's the moment where I touched down at the bottom of the Challenger Deep. Let's have both, can we?
It was one of the lowest acts of the war in the Pacific, an act of pure bastardry. Just off the Queensland coast, a Japanese submarine torpedoed and sank the Australian hospital ship, the Centaur. 268 people, doctors, nurses, orderlies and crew, perished. Now that was 60 years ago, May 14, 1943. Tonight, the cruel aftermath of the Centaur atrocity. The story of how we've all been fooled by a charlatan and a fraudster, and of how his claim that he had found the Centaur wreck was false. Now, sadly, all of this means just one thing, that what we thought was a war grave, held sacred by many Australians, isn't. In Queensland and in Sydney last Wednesday, relatives and friends gathered to remember the dead. The 268 souls lost on board the Centaur. Today, only 8 survivors remain from that terrible night. One of them, George McGrath, is 86.
There's no doubt in my mind that was this bloody murder, the Centaur.
George was an ambulance driver, just 26 and in high spirits. On the Centaur, the night she went down, there was a birthday party for one of the nurses.
The nursing sisters decided to put on a party. They had a cake and all the fittings and whatever, and the captain supplied quite a bit of beer and so forth. And
she was brightly lit and marked with red crosses. Obviously a hospital ship, the Centaur was heading for New Guinea. At 3:30 on the morning of May 14, 1943, navigator Gordon Rippon took a bearing off Point Lookout Lighthouse on North Stradbroke Island. The Centaur was running due north, 23 nautical miles out to sea.
I was sitting here and I was looking at my watch. This is probably one of the last things you usually do before you sort of lie down. And I can't recollect whether I lie down or not, but I know that there's this dreadful explosion. And I must have been going through the bloody air for quite a distance.
The torpedo was dead on target. It struck near the oil bunkers on the port side and they exploded seconds later.
I picked myself up and I always recollect, I don't know whether it's mental telepathy, a voice, I reckon it's my wife, saying, "Mac, get off the ship, go, 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 get out, go." That's when I took off, hit the water, and I'm swimming. Luckily I'm a pretty powerful swimmer. Going for my life, and I look back and there's no Centaur. When daylight came, and of course there was the great dorsal fins round and round. Round and round. They'd been taking the scream. I do recollect screams and cries for help. It was bloody pitiful, you couldn't do a thing. See, even in a float you're at the mercy of the sea, and their legs would be in the water, and the bloody sharks, they'd be a sitting duck. They'd grab and pull them under. Be torn to pieces in no time. What a bloody death. What a death.
Here was a terrible, terrible tragedy, and right on the doorstep of Brisbane. It's 50 miles off Brisbane. I mean, this was the closest that the war had been to Brisbane.
And to put the fear of God, so to speak, amongst people?
Absolutely, that there could be a Japanese submarine operating not very far away, just the other side of Moreton Island.
John Foley is a master mariner, a naval historian, and an authority on the Centaur. What explanation can you give as to why the Japanese did it? Of course, I mean, they admitted it, more than 35 years later?
Yes, they did. Nakagawa, the captain of the submarine, was getting close to the end of his stint of duty down here, and he hadn't had any success at all. He didn't want to go back with all his torpedoes still on board.
So he just let one fly at a hospital ship?
Perhaps a bit of frustration at the end of his tour. He hadn't had a chance to sink anything, and here was an opportunity.
The exact resting place of the Centaur had always been uncertain, but based on Navigator Rippon's evidence and records from the Japanese government, it has always been confidently believed that the wreck was in deep water 23 nautical miles off the coast. Then, in 1995, this was all turned on its head when the wreck was found, and what's more, found much closer to the coast and in relatively shallow water, just 9 miles off Cape Morton Lighthouse.
There it is.
Yeah, well, that's it there. There it is.
For sure.
On A Current Affair, Melbourne man Don Dennis told the nation how he had discovered the Centaur.
Began when I was out on a trawler with a friend one day. And, my ears happened to prick up when I heard him mention that a target we were observing on the sonar was a hospital ship.
Using a special underwater camera, A Current Affair showed the first pictures of the wreck lying some 170 metres down.
We're coming back a good shot of the rudder. This is the part that really excited us. I mean, you can see the shape of the stern and the rudder, and it just matches the photographs identically.
For relatives of the deceased, like George Bracken, it was an opportunity for a formal goodbye.
I place on these waters, in the place of the grave of my 2 brothers, Paul and John, on behalf of myself and my family.
Caloundra on Queensland's Sunshine Coast has this park to mark its closeness to the new site where the Centaur was supposedly found. The Government Gazette proclaimed the new site is approximately 27 degrees by 154. You see, Canberra had swallowed Don Dennis's story hook, line and sinker. True, they did do the most cursory of checks when they sent a couple of naval vessels up here to simply sail across the site and determine that at least there was a wreck down there. But what they didn't do was check on the credentials of their informant. You see, Mr. Dennis is a man of very little repute. He has convictions for fraud and a reputation as a liar. In fact, a Victorian judge described him as a big-noting charlatan fraudster. Now, Dennis would not be interviewed for this story, but he did tell us that the film footage of the Centaur had been checked by the Navy, the Queensland Maritime Museum and the War Memorial. And that's not true. So no one at the Maritime Museum has ever seen that footage before?
Not that I'm able to find out.
Dr. Rod McLeod was president of the Queensland Maritime Museum for 24 years.
I certainly can say that nobody in Queensland Maritime Museum believes that they've ever seen that tape.
The guy that took the footage has claimed to some sources that he dived the wreck, some say using gases that just defy belief. He's since been convicted of fraud in Victoria, and for the government to have accepted this footage as some sort of evidence is almost ridiculous.
Trevor Jackson is an experienced wreck diver, and with diving physician Dr. Simon Mitchell, he has dived on the Centaur, or the so-called Centaur.
There was the mystery, the fact that this wreck was being called the Centaur, that no one had visited it to actually verify that, and that we had some doubts about the wreck's true identity that we wanted to put to rest.
They did reach the wreck at 170 metres, but what they saw neither confirmed nor disproved Dennis's claim.
When I was on the bottom and I went over to the wreck, I couldn't see anything to positively identify it either way, but I did get the feeling, having dived a lot of wrecks before, that this wasn't a wreck of the dimensions that the Centaur was, which was, nearly 100 metres long. It was a much smaller thing I was looking at.
So we showed the wreck footage to two experts who are in a position to have informed opinions. Captain John Foley, the naval historian, and Dr. Rod McLeod of the Queensland Maritime Museum.
OK, there's the critical picture.
What's wrong with that shot?
The shape of the rudder.
There it is there. What's the problem with it?
We can tell it's too rounded. The Centaur's rudder was not like that.
That is definitely not the Centaur?
That's definitely not the Centaur.
Do you agree with that, Rod?
Yes, I don't believe that's the shape of the Centaur's rudder.
Can you be 100% certain that that's not the Centaur?
Come on, I'll show you.
OK.
Now, if you come over here, Richard, you'll see we've got a rather good shot of the Centaur high and dry. There's quite a good photograph of the rudder there.
That's the ship itself?
That's the Centaur.
Right.
But we've also, even better than that, we've got the plan here of the general arrangement, and there's the stern of the Centaur.
Well,
and as you can see, the rudder is square. The rudder in your picture is quite round. And it wouldn't, even if it corroded like that over the years, it wouldn't corrode in an area like that. The thing would probably fall off. But this is a very definite rectangular shape.
So, I mean, logically, they cannot be the same ship? Cannot be the same ship?
I don't believe they can.
It's as good as certain that what we honour out there as a war grave is not the Centaur. But if that's the case, then what is it? Well, sometimes, you know, governments can look pretty stupid. Back in 1951, the RAAF paid £1 to the Queensland Lime and Cement Company for an old ship known as the Kyogle. They took it 10 kilometres out there and sunk it. Bombing practice. Now you must think I'm getting a bit old if I can remember what happened way back in 1951. But no, the most modern of methods, the government's own website. There it is, the Kyogle, sunk 10 kilometres east of Cape Morton, 12th of May 1951. And last week, 60 Minutes found the plans of the Kyogle in the National Archives. There, on the stern, is a D-shaped rudder, the same style and shape as the rudder on the wreck.
By comparing the footage with the photographs of the stern of the Centaur and the stern of the Kyogle, it's apparent that the footage much more closely matches that of the Kyogle. The rudders are of a different design. The rudder on the Kyogle is rounded, the footage rudder is rounded.
In light of this, next week the Australian Navy has two minesweepers investigating the wreck that they call the Centaur and we call the Kyogle. Now this is something they should have done 8 years ago.
It was a ship on which 268 people perished. It was the worst merchant shipping disaster in Australian waters in World War II. So it has tremendous national importance, and it is of such importance that it should be clarified exactly where it is and should be protected where it is.
And if we're right, then the Centaur lies just where the non-shonky evidence has always said it was, where it was sunk in a Japanese war crime 60 years ago, 23 nautical miles off the coast from North Stradbroke Island.
Well, I think that if you had a dear lost relative and they were buried somewhere and you were going to a Sydney cemetery when you should have been going to a Canberra cemetery, I think to the relatives of those lost there, it's very important.
You remember last month we told the story of the Centaur, the Australian hospital ship sunk by a Japanese submarine off the Queensland coast 60 years ago. 268 people, all non-combatants, died. But we also revealed that the bastardry didn't end there, and that a convicted conman, Don Dennis, had fooled everybody into thinking he had found the Centaur. Well, tonight, the truth. What the Navy has found now that it's had a proper look at the wreck. But first, a quick look back at our original story. The exact resting place of the Centaur had always been uncertain, but it was thought it probably lay in deep water 23 nautical miles off the Queensland coast. Then, in 1995, the wreck was, supposedly, found much closer to the coast, just off Cape Morton Lighthouse.
There it is. Yeah, well, that's it there. There it is. For sure.
On A Current Affair, Melbourne man Don Dennis told the nation how he had discovered the Centaur.
This is the part that really excited us. I mean, you can see the shape of the stern and the rudder, and it just matches the photographs identically.
Caloundra on Queensland's Sunshine Coast has this park to mark its closeness to the new site where the Centaur was supposedly found. The Government Gazette proclaimed the new site is approximately 27 degrees by 154. You see, Canberra had swallowed Don Dennis's story hook, line and sinker. True, they did do the most cursory of checks when they sent a couple of naval vessels up here to simply sail across the site and determine that at least there was a wreck down there. But what they didn't do was check on the credentials of their informant. You see, Mr. Dennis is a man of very little repute. He has convictions for fraud and a reputation as a liar.
The guy that took the footage has claimed to some sources that he dived the wreck, some say using gases that just defy belief. He's since been convicted of fraud in Victoria, and for the government to have accepted this footage as some sort of evidence is almost ridiculous.
Trevor Jackson is an experienced wreck diver, and with diving physician Dr. Simon Mitchell, he has dived on the Centaur, or the so-called Centaur.
When I was on the bottom and I went over to the wreck, I couldn't see anything to positively identify it either way, but I did get the feeling, having dived a lot of wrecks before, that this wasn't a wreck of the dimensions that the Centaur was, which was, nearly 100 metres long. It was a much smaller thing I was looking at.
So we showed the wreck footage to two experts who are in a position to have informed opinions. Captain John Foley, the naval historian, and Dr. Rod McLeod of the Queensland Maritime Museum.
Okay, there's the critical picture.
What's wrong with that shot?
The shape of the rudder.
There it is there. What's the problem with it?
We can tell it's too rounded. The Centaur's rudder was not like that.
That is definitely not the Centaur?
That's definitely not the Centaur.
Do you agree with that? It's now all but certain that the wreck the Navy calls the Centaur is in fact the Kyogle, a ship the RAF sank in target practice back in 1951. A few weeks ago, the Navy sent two minesweepers to reinvestigate this wreck. Now, last week, the Navy reported to the government that, we were right and they were wrong, that the wreck is not the Centaur.
That is amazing.
And here's the proof.
Jesus.
This is the minesweeper's eye view of what was thought to be the Centaur. Now, these pictures by themselves don't prove anything, but the Navy's sonar does. Clearly, this is an intact ship. Clearly, it's 55 metres long. Clearly, it can't be the 96-metre Centaur. Presumably, it's now only a matter of time until the government relocates this most important war cemetery back to where it belongs, 23 nautical miles off the Queensland coast.
The evidence was so uncritically accepted by the authorities back when it was first presented. I mean, it was there plain as day for everybody to see. They only needed to look at the video and show it to someone who knew about shipwrecks to see that it wasn't the Centaur. And it's very unfortunate because the misidentification of this wreck is going to cause some pain for people who have an emotional involvement in the story, descendants of the people who were on board, even some survivors. And those are people who deserve a better deal than that.
The islands of Micronesia really are a Pacific paradise. Endless golden beaches, impossibly blue sea, carefree islanders. But maybe not for much longer. The islands were right in the middle of the battle for the South Pacific during the Second World War. the battle that probably saved us from a Japanese invasion. Now, 60 years on, thousands upon thousands of wartime wrecks are sitting on the bottom of the ocean. And inside them, there's a very dangerous cargo, just ready to cause untold devastation. Marvel at the unspoiled splendour of the Pacific, while you can. Below the surface, a massive time bomb is set to destroy this island paradise. "60 years ago, this was where the United States and Japan fought their savage air and sea battles for supremacy in the Pacific. Hundreds of sailors and airmen were killed, their ships and planes sent to the bottom of the ocean. Down here, along with the souls of the dead, lies the lethal legacy of that violent past.
We were basically the stage for the Pacific theatre, and the protagonists came in, they had their war, and now that they've gone, we're left to basically live with the consequences of all those actions.
Beneath these waters lie more than 1,000 World War II wrecks, 3 million tonnes of shipping, and they're just the ones we know about. Inside many of these rusting hulks are millions and millions of litres of fuel and oil. It's not a matter of if there'll be a major oil spill here in Micronesia, it's when. And the potential for disaster is just astonishing. World War II wrecks are spread over a vast area, thousands and thousands of kilometres from just north of Cairns on the Queensland coast right through the South Pacific to Japan.
What we need is to try and sit down and look at this as probably one of the biggest environmental issues in the Pacific at the moment, and one that we need to address.
Environmentalist Sefa Nawadra is the man trying to make the world sit up and take notice. He and his team have begun the massive job of logging all the wrecks and assessing the risk of leaks.
So far we've identified close to 2,500.
That's staggering.
Yes, it is. It's something that I guess we haven't really tried to assess because it's something that we've been trying to ignore. It's a bit like an ostrich putting its head in the sand, I guess. Until now, we don't have a choice. Things are starting to happen and we need to act.
And there have been warnings. For 23 years, Lance Higgs has brought divers to Truk Lagoon, where the Japanese suffered one of the greatest naval defeats of all time. It's a treasure trove for divers. Some ships carry tanks and aircraft. Evidence of life on board still lies undisturbed. Plates, gas masks, boots, even bottles of sake. But along with the relics, this danger signal. Bubbles of oil and fuel bursting free of the wrecks.
From time to time here at Truk, we frequently see oil coming to the surface as a tank lets go or another part of the ship deteriorates, and or even sometimes divers' bubbles dislodging certain parts of the ship's structures that permit oil to come to the surface, sometimes in small quantities and steady quantities for years at a time, others in big bursts that last maybe 1 to 2 weeks before they're dissipated.
Yet the warnings were ignored, and last year the worst case scenario actually happened. the huge sunken oil tanker USS Mississauga burst. Oil poured out, threatening the pristine Ulithi Atoll.
There was about 2 million US gallons, or about 10 million liters of oil there. If that had gotten out, it would have been something similar to what happened in Alaska with the Exxon Valdez.
The Exxon Valdez, as big as that?
Yes, it's something in that scale.
Just imagine what the devastation could have been like. 10 million litres of oil swamping this beautiful archipelago. The Micronesian government declared a state of emergency and banned all fishing. A near fatal blow to a community that relies on the sea for its survival.
Imagine all supermarkets in the city being closed for 3 months, because that's basically what happened in Ulithi when they had the spill. They couldn't go out and fish in the lagoon for 3 months and had to find alternative ways of finding food for living and just carrying on with life.
The Mississauga went down in November 1944 when it was attacked by a Japanese suicide submarine. But under international law, the United States is still responsible for the tanker and its cargo of 10 million litres of oil.
It is certainly a large amount of fuel oil, and certainly it would be a very difficult task if it had been released all at one time to protect the environment and the people who live there.
Faced with an environmental catastrophe matching the Exxon Valdez, the Americans acted just in time.
That's the hull of the boat, is that right?
In February, USS Salvor arrived off Ulithi Atoll with orders to stop the spill and recover Mississauga's oil.
The procedures and the equipment has been tested.
Commander John Carter was in charge of the $6 million operation.
The process itself is actually relatively simple in nature. We essentially mount a flange, use a special drill to drill through the bottom of the hull, connect up a pump and pump out the fuel oil. It's relatively that simple.
It took almost a month, but Commander Carter and his crew managed to pump the tanker dry and save Ulithi, for the moment at least.
And what do you do with 10 million litres of fuel oil?
Well, the 10 million litres of fuel oil are then going to be recycled in Singapore. Certainly, if the Navy can sell that back to recoup some of the costs of the operation, that would certainly be to benefit.
That's cold comfort for the people of Micronesia. Sefa Nawadra fears this is just the beginning. Next time, it could be much, much worse.
I guess it's more a case of when it happens rather than if it happens, because these vessels have been down there for 60 years, and another Mississauga is bound to happen, because there's 157 tankers that we've identified so far, about the same size and having the same cargo as the USS Mississauga.
And if they leaked, what impact would it have?
It would have almost catastrophic impacts on some of these islands, because basically the islands aren't geared up to respond to a spill of that magnitude. It's just beyond any of the capabilities that even some of the bigger countries would have.
Here in Ulithi, the threat has passed, but the people of this entire region now find themselves at the centre of an international standoff. The Americans insist the Mississauga's oil salvage does not pave the way for a total clean-up. Just who is responsible? Well, it seems until there's another disaster, no one is prepared to take any action whatsoever.
Who is responsible for the wrecks? Certainly, I would not know. That's not a question that I can answer.
Under international law, any naval vessels still remain the property of the flag state, or whichever state owned the vessel when it went down. Basically, the Japans and the United States and any other country that owns naval vessels that are down in the Pacific.
In Truck Lagoon, all the sunken vessels are Japanese. But so far it's a case of out of sight, out of mind. It took until March this year for the Japanese to even acknowledge that a problem existed. But, like the Americans, they refused to commit themselves to a long and expensive mass cleanup.
Is there a need to do it, considering what you've seen in recent weeks?
Is there a need to, on an ideal world basis, to pump all the ships that have gone down, that have fuel in them, out so the environment is safer? Certainly, one could argue that case. But whose responsibility those fall onto? Certainly, that's not for me to conjecture.
You wouldn't be willing to speculate, have a personal view?
Well, certainly I have personal views, but I'm not in a position to state those.
I guess the final consideration should be the ways of life of people who are here, because they did suffer quite a lot during the war, and they shouldn't be expected to suffer more from the consequences of something that wasn't any of their doing. And it's their way of life, and they're entitled to keep it.
60 years ago, these waters were the scene of a bloody chapter in world history. Now, a new disaster looms, one which threatens the very existence of Micronesia and its people, one that so far the world has ignored.
I think for me it's not really an issue of if we succeed. I think I have to succeed because it's a real problem for us in the region. I guess it's imperative that we try and raise this as an issue that the world takes notice of. Right?
Sydney under attack. It was a night of high drama and the beginning of one of those really great wartime mysteries. How on earth did 3 Japanese midget submarines sneak into Sydney Harbour? How did one of them torpedo a Navy ferry and kill 21 sailors on board? Then, most intriguing of all, however did it get away? Well, late last year, that particular puzzle was solved in spectacular fashion. A bunch of knockabout scuba divers finally found the wreck and took us to it. And so the first amazing pictures of sub M24 appeared on television. And now this past week, one more moving chapter, perhaps the final one, was written.
On Sunday, the 31st of May, 1942, 5 Japanese submarines...
Just a few kilometres off Sydney's northern beaches, a moving ceremony aboard HMAS Melbourne. "60 metres below are the remains of Sub-Lieutenant Katsuisha Ban and Petty Officer Momoru Oshibi, the crew of Japanese midget submarine M24. After 65 years of not knowing what happened to them, their families are finally able to say goodbye.
I could hear my big brother saying from the bottom of the sea, "Thank you for coming to visit me."
Earlier, on Sydney's Garden Island, more services remembering the Japanese attack on Sydney, the tragic loss of life, and the bravery and audacity of the M24's crew. And barely noticed at the back of the crowd, a couple of mates without whom none of this would have happened.
Having the sensation of meeting the families and seeing the relief in their faces of knowing and coming out and grieving for their relatives, it's really quite touching.
They are so happy for us too that we found it, and I'm just glad to have helped out in that way for them.
They were saying thank you, were they?
Oh yes, very much, and some of them that was probably their only word of English. They said thank you many times.
Isn't that it there?
That's it right there.
Yeah.
8 months ago, these diving mates solved one of Australia and Japan's greatest wartime mysteries by finding the wreck of the M24. And they invited me along to share their great adventure. You couldn't get better mates. A builder, electrician, bus driver, retired painter. There's nothing fancy about these fellas. In fact, they proudly called their group No Frills Divers.
Are you ready for us to go in?
Yep.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it, to think that we're on top of the wreck right now.
Certainly is. Absolutely incredible, isn't it? They're looking for what, 60 years or something? Solve the mystery. 1, 2, 3.
By normal scuba standards, this is a deep and risky dive. But for these men, the prize that's revealed makes the danger worthwhile. Covered it.
We just saw this long shape with a little lump sticking out of it, and the heart, started going, and you think, nah, it couldn't be.
You can actually talk underwater.
Yeah.
And I yelled at Tone.
Yep.
Particularly when we saw the props at the back.
That's
Sub,
right.
sub, sub.
I have been dreaming of finding this wreck for 25 years of diving. Finally, it's a realisation. I still can't believe it.
Few civilians believed the war could come this far south. Just how wrong they were on the night of May 31st, 1942.
It was the night World War II came to a very unsuspecting Sydney. The Japanese attacked with 3 midget submarines.
Those people living near the coast will not forget the invasion, not for the rest of their lives.
The target was supposed to be the American battlecruiser USS Chicago, moored in the harbour. 2 of the midgets, the M22 and the M27, were discovered and disabled before they could do any damage. But the third, the M24, evaded our defences and fired its 2 torpedoes. It was a truly audacious strike. Sydney was completely unprepared. Our best defence was probably luck. The USS Chicago, with 1,100 sailors on board, was moored just over there. The M24 had her in its sights from around about here. One of its torpedoes, thankfully, fizzled. It ran aground and failed to detonate. But the other just missed the Chicago and a Dutch submarine and hit the seawall at Garden Island, exploding underneath the HMAS Cuttable. It was that blast that killed 19 Australian and 2 British sailors.
Here in Sydney was the ferry Cuttable, which was serving as portion of a naval base.
I honestly thought at that time that everybody was dead because it was really horrendous, the noise and the violence, and the waves just raced up the stairs and I got caught there.
64 years ago, Seaman Neil Roberts was 18. Minutes before the attack, he'd finished his watch. But instead of going to his own hammock on a lower deck of the Cuttable, he borrowed a mate's, higher up. If you hadn't had that hammock on the top floor,
I'd have died there. I'm convinced of that because where I actually slept was where the bulk of them died.
In the mayhem of that night, the Chicago and other ships spotted and fired on the Japanese sub, but still it managed to escape. At 1:58 early the next morning, it was detected leaving the harbour and heading straight out to sea. Where it went from that moment, nobody knew. It disappeared without a trace. How'd you go?
Fantastically.
What's it look like?
Unbelievable.
Since discovering the sub, these no-frill divers have been back to visit about half a dozen times. And while none of them are trained marine archaeologists, properly authenticating their find is important.
I think we've been told that there were 40 different excursions of people that have said they've found it. Well, they haven't. And they didn't. We did.
It's one of the things I'd be looking for is battle damage. Do you know what these bars are?
For official verification, the men turn to Commander Shane Moore, who's in charge of the Australian Navy's Heritage Collection.
There's no prop guard on it.
No, you can see the rudder guard on the
Over the
front.
years, the commander's listened to many others with similar claims, all proven false, so he's not quick to make pronouncements.
It looks like it's hit bow first at some speed.
But in the end, the video evidence, combined with the measurements taken by the divers, proves overwhelming.
If it's not the M24, what could it possibly be?
It can't be anything else.
You're pretty convinced looking at these pictures, are you?
I'm convinced.
Ask a man a silly question.
There is no doubt that that is an A-type midget submarine of the Imperial Japanese Navy.
Did you always expect that this would be found eventually?
Well, you would say so. 79-foot submarines don't necessarily disappear forever, but it's extraordinary that some amateur divers have come up with this remarkable find.
Not many people understand just how significant this will be to the Japanese. It's an honourable thing that you gentlemen have done.
Over the years, I don't hold any grudges against the Japanese, and it was tragic, it was war, and I suppose in a major sense I have a tremendous admiration for these men because they were locked in, not a very fancy craft, and they died.
On behalf of the No Frills divers and all the divers that found this wreck, we'd like to donate this brief as a mark of respect for the two Japanese sailors that died in this submarine. Amen.
Yes. Do you blokes still pinch yourself about this discovery, that you found it?
Just about every day, yeah. Yeah, there's every time there's something on the TV or you read something else in the paper, it's you sort of got to sit back and think, well, hang on, I was one of those blokes. So
that was us.
Yeah, that was us.
That was us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we've gone from a bunch of weekend divers who just go out and have fun, and all of a sudden we've found a submarine and solved a great mystery, and really after this I'll die happy.
After almost 70 years, the wreck has been found, the great maritime mystery solved. And later this month, we'll pause to remember the 645 men who died when HMAS Sydney was sunk off the West Australian coast back in 1941. It might also be a fitting moment to spare a thought for the fate of her sister ship, HMAS Perth, another casualty of war now almost forgotten. But it's a story well worth commemorating, a saga of survival, valour and mateship. All those qualities that make us who we are. And it's also the story of one man who lived through an incredible ordeal to tell this astounding tale. 200 kilometres off the West Australian coast, 2.5 kilometres below the surface, these murky pictures revealed the remarkably preserved HMAS Sydney. It's an eerie, sombre sight, the final resting place for 645 Australian sailors. Did you think they'd ever find it?
No, I thought she'd disappeared forever.
I thought she'd blown up and the bits had gone everywhere.
Arthur Bancroft has followed the search for the Sydney with a sense of wonderment.
The gas mask. Yes, yes.
67 years ago, Arthur could so easily have been aboard the Sydney. Instead, he was posted to her sister ship, the HMAS Perth.
There's always a little bit of jealousy between the Perth and the Sydney, which was the best ship, a friendly rivalry. So when you lose one of them, you're losing part of yourself.
But just 3 months after the Sydney was lost, the Perth was attacked and sunk too. More than 300 men were killed. This was just the beginning of Arthur Bancroft's extraordinary war, and before it ended, he'd escaped not one, but 2 ships sinking. They left you to die?
Left us to die, yeah.
This mild-mannered 86-year-old is truly one of the great survivors. As well as his exploits at sea, he also lived through the Japanese death camps as a prisoner of war. And he risked execution to keep a secret diary of the brutality of camp life. So secret and so treasured, it's never been seen until now.
Tuesday, 22nd of November,
1942. I'm a bit of a wreck with complaints lately. It's a wonder I don't drop dead and be done with it.
But this is also a love story between Arthur and his wife Merla that has spanned 6 decades. Now, you have a striking young man hanging around your neck.
Isn't he? You have a look at that?
He is a bit handsome.
He was 19. There's a photo on the other side too of myself. So with the 2 of us, I wore it there all through the war, and I often wear it now.
Are you still fond of him?
Love him.
Love him. In November 1940, compelled by patriotic duty and a sense of adventure, Arthur kissed his sweetheart goodbye and signed up to go to war.
I went home that night and said to my parents, you know what I've just done? No, I just joined the Navy. And you know what my mother said to me? She said, oh, at least I know you can swim. She never really knew what was in front of me.
The 19-year-old able seaman was assigned to the mighty HMAS Perth, a perfect fit for this proud Perth man. And in 1942, with 700 other men, he set sail for Indonesia to fight the Japanese.
I was in the port 4-inch guns, which is right there.
That little man there could have been you.
That could have been me.
Arthur's first encounter with the Japanese was in the Java Sea, and the battle was a wipeout for the Allies. The Japanese outnumbered and outgunned us. In fact, the HMAS Perth and the USS Houston were the only 2 ships to escape. But just 24 hours later, their luck ran out as they unexpectedly sailed into another Japanese invasion fleet, a fleet of 30 against 2. Despite the odds, they took on the enemy. The HMAS Perth opened fire, but within minutes she was hit by torpedoes. And at what point did you realise, we're not getting out of this one?
Well, when the second torpedo hit, and that's when the captain said, prepare to abandon ship. And then when the 3rd torpedo hit, he said, abandon ship, every man for himself. Now the 4th torpedo hit, is every man for himself, good luck. And so that was the end.
In naval terms, that particular battle was a knife fight with guns. That's how close the ships were to each other.
For Commander Shane Moore, the Navy's historian, the sinking of HMAS Perth was a terrible loss. For her survivors, the uncertainty must have been terrifying.
320 men went into the water. Another 300 were killed in that actual engagement.
So what did you do?
I swam away about 50 yards and looked around and I thought, oh, there goes my home.
How long were you in the water for?
Oh, this time only about 10 hours, I suppose.
Is that all? Is that all?
Yeah, so...
Of an estimated workforce of 61,000 Allied prisoners, more than 12,000 died on the job, 2,800 of them Australians.
Having defied death in the water, Arthur now had to try to survive as a prisoner of war, sent to the most notorious camp of all, on the Burma Railway.
They say a man died for every sleeper laid along this track.
Had no idea what was going to be in front of us. No idea.
What was it like?
I think that was the hardest part of it, is not knowing whether our family knew we were alive.
Not hearing it all from him made us realise something dreadful had happened. Yeah.
So, with no word from home, Arthur's family became the men of the prisoner of war camp. And through all this, Arthur risked his life to keep a remarkable diary, buried in a hole beneath his bunk.
Tuesday, 24th of November 1942. What a lovely
way to spend one's 21st birthday, lying in your hammock in a POW camp with a poisoned foot and a crook ear. Wacko.
On scraps of paper, written with stolen pencils, Arthur's neat hand details the agony, the boredom, even the mischief of his day-to-day life.
A Jap was teasing the pups as usual, so I heaved a few pebbles at him. The fourth salvo got him fair and square on the head, and didn't he buck? He blamed everyone but me.
But what makes his diary different is that he also recorded the musings of his mates, their memories and their poems.
We had a 6-inch cruiser, the HMAS Perth. She was built to be a fighter and always proved her worth.
What would have happened to you if the Japanese guards had found your diary?
Well, I think there would have been a bashing at least, and there's always a chance that it could be an execution.
After 15 months, Arthur was considered still strong enough for more slave labour, this time in the coal mines. He, along with 1,300 other prisoners, was to be shipped out to Japan. The only good news, he was going with his best mate, Lofty. But as if Arthur hadn't already gone through enough, after 6 days of sailing, the Japanese convoy came under attack from American submarines.
One of the tankers in front of us, that blew up, and the next thing, the next tanker that blew up, and it was just, the water was just suddenly covered in flames, and we were the next. Next thing, a torpedo hit our ship.
The Japanese crew escaped on the ship's life rafts, leaving the 1,300 POWs to fend for themselves.
They started jeering us. Yeah, yeah. So we started saying, rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves, or whatever. And so they left us. That was the last Japanese we saw.
As the ship sank, the sea was littered with bodies covered in oil. 1,000 men died. Somehow, Arthur and Lofty survived and now found themselves in the water together, clinging to the ship's wreckage. Arthur spotted a larger piece of debris, but couldn't convince Lofty to swim over to it.
Lofty said, we're going over now, and he wouldn't come with me. I'm sorry, mate, I'm going to leave you. He said, that's all right, blood. Shook hands with him and never saw him again. His mother said to me later, why didn't you make him? She couldn't do that.
Yeah. You couldn't make him come with you?
No, that's the saddest moment in my life.
For 4 days, Arthur and 4 others clung to their makeshift raft without a drop of fresh water. Then, some hope. The Americans returned and started pulling desperate and exhausted men out of the sea. So incredible was their survival, the Americans filmed the rescue bid. But then, the unbelievable. While Arthur and the others yelled for help, the rescuers couldn't see or hear them and left without them. I mean, what were you going through and what did you tell the men that you were looking after?
I just said, look, don't worry, there's got to be another submarine around. So, it'll come tomorrow. Don't worry.
Did you believe it?
No.
But remarkably, 2 days later, with a typhoon approaching, they did hear the submarines again. After 6 days in total, they were the last survivors to be picked up, and Arthur the last to climb to safety.
And the captain was up on the bridge and permission to come on board, sir? I said, permission granted.
It took another month, but 2.5 years after setting sail, Arthur finally made it back to Perth into the arms of his sweetheart, Merla. When he finally got home, do you remember when you saw him for the first time?
Oh yes, I remember that night vividly. I can remember sitting in his parents' lounge room, just looking at him and marvelling at the fact that he was sitting there and he was alive. But I just sat quietly there and just looked at him. That's all I could do.
So Arthur, is this an original? Is this the real thing?
Yes, well I had two. One that went down with the ship and the other one I left home, and we used that for our wedding.
Oh, so this is your good hat.
That's our good hat.
Does it still fit?
Oh, I think so.
Like most men of his generation, Arthur Bancroft returned home and got on with life. A bank job and little mention of the war. But there was always the diary. For the past 64 years, Arthur was the keeper of some precious stories. Not just his own, but many of his mates who didn't make it home. Now he's donating the diary to the Navy, entrusting those memories to the nation.
The story has been in the Bancroft possession for many years, but now it's in the nation's.
And why does that upset you?
A part of my life that's gone left me. That we're very proud that we've done what we've done, because we know it's in good, safe hands.
You're deep underwater. It's ice cold, pitch black, and the walls are closing in on you. It sounds nightmarish, but believe it or not, for some, this is a sport, a very dangerous one. Cave diving offers the thrill of exploration, discovering places that no other person has ever seen. That's certainly what attracted Agnes Myloka, but in this remote other world, any mistake can be deadly. At first, you have absolutely no idea what you're in for. In Piccaninny Ponds near Mount Gambier, South Australia, the water is as clear as gin. And soon its mysteries start to be revealed. A limestone chasm formed by fresh water bubbling to the surface over millions of years. Descend this, and you enter the cathedral. It's so spectacular, so supernatural, you must remember the first rule of diving. Keep breathing.
For me, it's a sense of flying, of being in crystal clear water and being able to move through the cave and hover in the middle like you're hanging in space.
My guide through this hidden wonder is cave diver and explorer Liz Rogers.
It's about finding out what's around the next corner. Because you really don't know. And if you come off the end of the tunnel and, you know, maybe there's a low section there and you find your way through and then it opens out into a massive chamber on the other side, that feeling is just amazing.
But all this thrilling beauty can come at a price. Underwater caves are very unforgiving places. Not everyone who enters finds their way back out.
My name is Agnes Myloka and I'm an explorer, and I'm going to take you on a series of underwater adventures that you will never forget.
29-year-old Melbourne woman Agnes Myloka was a shining star in this dark world. Tragically, earlier this year, She died while exploring the famous tank cave near Mount Gambier. Extensively mapped over 40 years, all its easy secrets have been revealed. But Agnes instinctively felt there was more to discover despite the dangers.
I guess especially in virgin exploration, there is always a danger because you don't know where you're going, you don't know what's ahead of you, and anything could happen. I mean, your bubbles could dislodge an avalanche. If you're lucky, you'll make it out. If you don't, you won't.
On Sunday, February 27th, Agnes didn't make it out. Diving alone, she became disoriented and ran out of air.
We knew why she was there. She was there because of who she was, and diving was what she did, and cave exploration was what she was good at.
So she always knew that death was a risk.
And it's something you consider in cave diving when you consider your equipment configuration and how you're going to do the dive and what decompression schedule you might be using. So she knew the risks she was taking.
Agnes died more than half a kilometre underground, and it took divers 3 days to bring her body back to the surface. Liz Rogers was in the rescue team. What will you miss most?
I miss having my dive buddy back.
How hard was it for you when her parents turned up?
They were, what can you say to people?
We are parents that lost the child. It will take a long time to recover, I think. Maybe we'll never recover.
Agnes was Chris Miloka's only child. He's shattered, of course, but he's also proud that his daughter had the courage and conviction to enter such an alien world. Agnes was never happy to go to the end of the line and stop, was she?
No. She was always wondering what is there, what more could be done, and there was nothing that could stop her.
Would she have listened if you'd told her to stop?
That's the point. She would probably ignore it. You do not own children.
There are two types of cave divers. There's the weekend tourists who are happy to come and follow the guidelines laid by others. Then you've got explorers like Agnes who get to the end of the line and keep going.
I'm willing to take it to the next level, to push harder for the smallest of restrictions, to go where no one's been before.
Before the accident, Agnes was on the cutting edge of exploration. In one cave system in Florida, she discovered a massive 3 kilometres of new terrain never before seen by man or woman.
She was becoming a Grand Master as an underwater cave explorer. You would have loved Ag. I mean, she was just so full of life. And look, she'd have you sitting here with story after story after story. Some would have your hair standing on end and you think, my God, you're a gutsy woman. And she absolutely was.
Andrew White is one of Australia's most famous cave explorers. In 1988, he led the Panic and Plains expedition in the Nullarbor, which almost ended in catastrophe after half of his team was caught by a cave collapse.
Well, you know, to the uninitiated, it seems crazy, I must admit. You're going in there, it's dark, it's wet, it's cold, and you might die, and you think that's fun, but it's very seductive and enticing because it's like Pandora's box. You go around one corner, you open up another door, and suddenly you're drawn into this environment.
Andrew first met Agnes on the set of his cave diving epic, Sanctum, which he produced last year.
I haven't done this for a while.
She played the stunt double for Judes, the female lead in the movie. In a pivotal scene, Judes and her dive buddy leave behind their spare tanks to force their way through a tight passage, what divers call a squeeze.
Every breath is stuck. My hose is caught.
Finally, they make it through.
Oh my God. Would you look at that?
But then, disaster. Judes dies after rupturing her airline. She had no backup air supply. While no one yet knows exactly what happened to Agnes in Tank Cave, she too left behind her spare air tank to push on.
So the decision to leave behind your spare air and continue exploration for, that thrill of being able to be the first person to see something that no one's ever seen before, that's exactly what Agnes was doing when she was exploring Mount Gambier.
There's been some criticism that she was reckless in what she was doing. Is that fair?
She wouldn't have deliberately stuffed herself into the back of a cave to kill herself. Anyone that's a high achiever is going to push themselves, and unfortunately the consequences are not great in an underwater cave.
A mistake means death.
Well, I mean, people think I'm trivialising, but I often say there are no accidents in cave diving, just fatalities. And the gravity of that is really meant to sort of shock newcomers to the sport into what they're really dealing with.
So should we put the regular list in now? Yep. Despite all the risks, there have been only 4 cave diving fatalities in Australia over the past 25 years. Quite heavy, aren't they? It's a credit to the training regime all divers must undertake before they can tackle what lies beneath. And pull. Oh. Beautiful. How do you feel? I was too exhausted to get in the water. It's challenging, but then so too is the environment I'm about to enter.
At that point in time, what's going to happen is that one of you will lose an air supply. I'm not going to tell you which one. Yep. And at that same time, both masks are going to be removed as well. So you're going to lose visibility and you're going to lose an air supply. The only thing out is that line.
Okay, so don't drop this. With Liz Rogers as my dive buddy, John Dalazuana is my trainer.
It's called a stress test. Okay?
Good. It's a good name for it. The water in Goulden Sinkhole is cold and murky. And without warning, my stress test begins. My regulator is taken from me, and while I'm going for my backup air supply, my mask removed. The number one rule here is never let go of the guideline. In caves, it's so easy to kick up silt. You can very quickly lose all visibility. Your guideline is your lifeline.
Okay, great, excellent. You knew exactly what was going on. You were really in tune with what you were doing.
Realise why they call it a stress test, though.
Do you?
I didn't realise you're going to do it to us so quickly. It's like, no, I'm not ready to give up my hair yet. Thanks to this training, deaths in Australia are the exception, not the rule. And it's impossible to imagine what it would have been like for Agnes, running out of air, all alone, lost hundreds of metres from the surface. Would she have known at the end there what was going to happen?
Oh yeah. She was very, she knew the ins and outs of cave diving very intimately, and you know what's going to happen. It's not a mystery. It's just a matter of how long it takes.
I believe something terrible happened that she couldn't control and she couldn't predict.
Is it hard looking at these pics?
It is a reminder that she was very happy and doing things that she loves.
That must touch you.
Sometimes it's heartbreaking.
It would be criminal for me to say that there are no risks associated with cave diving. sport of cave diving can see you become a dead diver. There's no gentle way of putting that.
Agnes leaves behind a stunning archive of her exploits. And it's only when you cave dive yourself you begin to realise why people like Agnes and Andrew and Liz do it in the first place. The euphoria of discovery is mixed with the thrill of survival. It's an adrenaline rush.
That is the most amazing thing I reckon I've ever seen. It's pretty cool down there. Come in the back of the cave with the sunlight coming in through the leads and the blue water. It's really gorgeous. That's why you do it. That's a good reason. I want to go again.
Last week's 10th anniversary of the loss of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 quite rightly focused on remembering the 239 passengers and crew who died. But it was also a rallying call to resume the search for the missing plane. And it seems the Malaysian government is receptive to the idea. If it happens, most expect Ocean Infinity, the company which unsuccessfully looked for MH370 in 2018, will again be tasked with the job. But we can report tonight there's another group of experienced deep-sea explorers who are standing by, ready to head to the Indian Ocean almost immediately. Tony, how many stories do you think are sitting at the bottom of the ocean?
Something like 20,000 planes, I think, have been lost in the ocean. Maybe more, some haven't even been counted. Tons of stories.
Tony Romeo is a former US Navy intelligence officer who wants to unlock the secrets of the ocean. To do it, his exploration company, Deep Sea Vision, uses this underwater drone called a Hugin 6000. Like an upside-down rocket, it catapults into the water off the back of the boat, submerging to the depths, where, torpedo-like, it can explore for up to 36 hours at a time.
It flies at 50 meters above the seafloor, and it just goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Big eyes, looking at everything it can see, sucks it in, stores it as data, comes back up to the surface. We plug a thumb drive into it, pull the data out, and we watch it on a computer exactly what it looked at.
The drone is fitted with state-of-the-art, high-resolution sonar technology, which Tony believes is perfect to detect objects at the bottom of the sea. Objects like crashed aeroplanes.
The equipment that we have, it's unbelievable how much resolution, how well it can see. I mean, you're talking a mile wide in resolution that's maybe 10 meters. So if you see a part of a wing that's 8 to 10 meters wide, you could see this almost a half mile to either side of you. It can't quite read a credit card number off the bottom of the seafloor, but you can get pretty close.
Underwater vehicles like the Hugin have been used in previous searches for MH370. But Tony says he's modified his drone so it can reach 4 times the area already covered. He's not getting ahead of himself, but he reckons he could locate the missing Boeing 777.
239 people on board. Of course, this was a big event for the world, for a jetliner like this to just go missing. 10 years is a long time to not know what happened to your family members.
Do you think you can find MH370?
I think we could. I think we can. We've proved our credibility. We've proved our competence. We've proved our ability to take equipment and use novel techniques.
To satisfy the doubters and substantiate his expertise, Tony wants the world to study these grainy sonar images he and his team captured only a few months ago. He says he's found Amelia Earhart's plane, which vanished over the Pacific Ocean in 1937.
Amelia Earhart, US heroine of the hour in desperate flight. On the last lap of a round-the-world flight, her plane comes down in the
We're the first ones to see Amelia Earhart in 86 years.
When it was announced, Tony's discovery made headlines around the world.
If this find proves to be correct, this could solve one of the greatest mysteries in American aviation.
He knows there's still plenty of work to be done to verify what he found, but he's sure he'll be proven right.
This is my little toy of her plane, Amelia Earhart's plane. On the image, you'll see these two twin vertical stabilizers in the back that are very characteristic of her aircraft. You have two large engines, and wings that were very far forward on the aircraft.
So what do you do now?
The next step is to confirm it, and then we curate the site to see if there's any debris around, anything that's fallen off, and then if it's in good shape and it's intact, structurally sound, we'll try to engineer a solution to bring it up.
MH370 might be a bigger plane than Amelia Earhart's Lockheed Electra, but the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean actually makes it a smaller needle in the haystack. Tony, however, has been meeting ocean and aviation experts and has mapped out a new and more defined search area. What do you need to find? What items do you need to find to make you go, that's MH370?
If you see one tray table or one suitcase, you know you're close enough now that you just need to hone in on where you're at. It'll be fascinating because obviously you find a black box which will unravel everything. You've got 239 cell phones in the back of that plane. I don't know if they're, possibly there's some data, something recorded on those devices that would kind of give us some clues.
At one of last week's memorials marking 10 years since the disappearance of MH370, Malaysia's Transport Minister, Anthony Locke, gave much-needed hope about the possibility of a new search.
As far as Malaysian government is concerned, we are committed to that search, and the search must go on.
Tony Romeo says planning is underway, and his company, Deep Sea Vision, has been asked to submit a search proposal to the Malaysian government.
I believe that the Malaysian government wants answers. I refuse to believe that they do not want a huge accident, a huge crash like this to go unresolved. It just isn't fair. It wouldn't be fair to the families.
So will you go ahead and search without the permission of the Malaysian government?
We'd like to have the Malaysian government's support behind it. I think that legitimizes what we're doing. And I think we want the Malaysian government to participate a little bit. It's a very expensive search.
It's now a race to the bottom. And the families of those on board MH370 can only hope the answers they deserve will finally surface. Tony, the whole world will be watching. Are you nervous?
Well, now that you say it like that, it's, I hope we can find it. We haven't had an airline accident like this, I don't think ever in history, right? But it solves what is otherwise a huge question mark for Malaysia and for the entire world. We need answers.
We want you to go to Antarctica, they said. Fantastic, I thought. After all, it is one of the last true wildernesses left on the planet. Then they told me to get there, I'd have to sail in a small yacht across the most treacherous passage of water in the world. Okay, still good, I guess. And we want you to make a story about leopard seals. Fine, I said, even though they're vicious and unpredictable predators. And of course, you'll have to dive in the freezing Antarctic waters and swim with them. Are you crazy? I screamed. But then I did it. Antarctica, the coldest, windiest, loneliest place on the planet. Nearly twice the size of Australia, this frontier is wild and at times brutal.
Just unbelievable vistas, unbelievable beauty, raw, untapped
Yeah, when you talk about unspoilt wilderness, it sounds almost like a cliche sometimes, but it's absolutely warranted when you talk about the Antarctic.
Dr. Doug Krause and naturalist Kelvin Murray are taking me on a 15-day Antarctic voyage. Our aim is to explore the challenges confronting its most notorious apex predator, the leopard seal. This will mean diving in the most extreme conditions imaginable.
Holy moly, that's freezing.
But just getting down there is tough enough.
You're going to go to such a beautiful place, you've got to pay a price in it.
Yeah, if it were easy, everybody would do it, right?
Yeah.
We set out from the Argentinian port of Ushuaia. Ahead of us lies Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America. And then the 450 nautical mile journey to the Antarctic Peninsula. It's a 3-day journey. To make it, we must cross the infamous Drake Passage, the most dangerous body of water in the world, claiming an estimated 800 ships and 20,000 lives. But it holds only respect, not fear, from our skipper, Australian Ben Wallace.
You've been doing this for so long, it must be worth it when you get to the other end.
Absolutely, every minute of it. Yeah, for me, it's the best place in the world.
And so it is. Its scale is mind-blowing. Its beauty breathtaking. But it's changing fast. The Antarctic Peninsula is one of the fastest warming regions on the planet. Over the last 60 years, the average air temperature has risen by more than 3 degrees. And while it looks like there's a lot of sea ice here, it's actually halved. And you have to remember, it's more than just icebergs. It's habitat for all sorts of creatures, including the leopard seal. Why should we care about the leopard seal or any creature down here?
Leopard seals are a large, intelligent mammal. And we're trying to learn how those large, intelligent mammals are adjusting in a changing world. You are a large, intelligent mammal. So understanding how these populations interact on our changing planet is definitely going to help human beings as well.
And the impact of climate change is most noticeable here at Cape Sherif, Livingston Island. Pretty stark, isn't it? On the northern edge of the Antarctic Peninsula, the Cape used to be covered in ice, but not anymore. Without their ice habitat, the leopard seal has become an environmental refugee, concentrating here and devastating the populations of other seals and penguins. But having so many leopard seals congregate in one spot was a boon for Doug's PhD project. Working for America's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, he was able to tag and sample the leopard seals.
So we've got 2 adult female leopard seals down here on the beach. I'm going to very, very slowly make my way down. And if these females are part of our existing study, I'm going to try to get a tissue sample. I'm going to try to pluck a whisker. And we'll tell us potentially what that animal's been eating for up to a couple of years.
Okay. So what will you use for that?
Very complicated piece of equipment called pliers.
Creeping up on an animal that's been described as having the eyes of an angel but the mouth of a devil isn't for the faint-hearted. And this inquisitive fur seal doesn't help matters by rousing the sleeping leopard seals. Doug's chances of sampling either are blown. A third in the bay next door provides another chance. But as quietly as he tries to crawl, the leopard seal stirs. There will be no whiskers from this 450-kilo predator today.
These animals are a lot less sedate, a lot less comfortable sleeping on land. As you saw, she woke up very easily when I got really close. Oh, hello.
Oop, right behind us. There are an estimated 300,000 leopard seals in Antarctica, and their fearsome reputation was cemented in 2003 when one grabbed young British marine biologist Kirsty Brown when she was snorkelling. Her death by drowning has meant many scientists, like Dr. Doug Krause, are forbidden to enter the water here. And according to Kelvin Murray, that's an overreaction.
You can't define a species by that one single event. And it was very, very tragic circumstances, but when you do look at the circumstances, much the same as we might see sharks taking surfers, it looks like this might have been a similar case, a case of mistaken identity.
The last time I dived, I think the water was about 28 degrees.
My heart bleeds for you.
For this naturalist and dive master, any risk of being in the water with leopard seals can be managed, and the reward is a truly unique and educational experience.
They are a big challenge, and we don't know an awful lot about them, and so there is that kind of edginess to it. And they are intimidating. I mean, it's at times, it's like being in the water with a bear, you know. I'm a bit of a champion for the underdog, and they've been such a demonised animal. You know, this killer of the Antarctic. You know, they're not just this big mean seal going around chewing things up. They're a much more complicated animal than that.
Listen to you got a soft spot for the leopard seals, don't you?
I do, it'll make me blush.
We've come to Mikkelsen Harbour, home to an Argentinian refuge hut. A large colony of Gen 2 penguins with plenty of fat chicks learning how to swim. A population of fur seals, and at least 3 patrolling leopard seals. This is as good a place as any to attempt to dive with them. I've never dived in such challenging conditions before. It's -1 in the water, the air temp's about the same, it's snowing, and I'm about to have an encounter with one of the top predators of Antarctica, the leopard seal. Most of the time I'm told they're just curious and will come very close for a look. That's what we're hoping will happen.
Happy hunting! We certainly picked a very Antarctic day for it.
I like that we're navigating icebergs and ice blocks on our way out to the dive site.
There's no confusing where we are.
Why did we decide to do this again?
Because they're wonderful animals and we're slightly touched.
On three. 1, 2, 3.
Diving in Antarctica is unlike anything I have experienced before. The water hits your face like 1,000 darts. It's not a matter of keeping warm, it's a question of how long before you start freezing.
The gas you're breathing is cold, your fingers are cold, your face is cold. I mean, everything, and it's just sucking energy and ability out of you.
It begs the question, why do we do it?
I think it's in our very nature to go off and explore, you know, to see wild and inhospitable places. That's why we try and get to the bottom of the ocean. That's why we try and get into outer space.
It's proven to be a very long and frustrating day. We saw a leopard seal this morning eating a penguin, and we've been chasing it basically, but they're so elusive and it's so easy to lose them amongst all the ice. So we spent the whole day out on the water. It is beyond cold, so beyond cold, but then tomorrow's always a new day, and fingers crossed that we find it again, we get one.
As we head out for another day's diving, we come across the grim calling card of a leopard seal, a wounded Gen 2 penguin.
That's obviously been one of the luckier ones. It's survived, but it's in a pretty bad way.
What's going to be the end result for that penguin?
I don't know, I mean, we do see them with some pretty gruesome injuries.
A reminder, if I needed one, of the potential risks of diving here. But finally, we're rewarded for our persistence. A young leopard seal showing only curiosity pays us a visit. Swooping down to investigate us, then gliding back to its iceberg for protection. It's a totally thrilling and chilling experience.
Holy moly, that's freezing! I'm not sure my words are making sense. My mouth can barely move. But it just kept coming in closer and closer. Swimming around us, and so sleek and powerful. And there was no sign of aggression at all. My first experience with a leopard seal couldn't have gone any better. How was that?
That was ace. That was ace. Really, really nice, lovely animal.
In the end, that was my only underwater encounter with a leopard seal. Nature still rules down here, despite the impact humans are having. And that's just the way two of Antarctica's most ardent advocates want to keep it.
Probably the most pristine wilderness that we have on Earth. They say that a lot of us that come down here and work here are bitten by this polar bug, you know, and once it gets you, it's like a sickness for life.
The reason I get up excited every single day when I'm down here is because I really believe that it is directly contributing to the best that humans can do to protect this place, this incredible, wonderful, wild place.